Gunsmoke and the chaparral through the belting rain. The ranger rode on, thankful for the small shelter the chaparral provided. Suddenly, he stopped and listened. "Horses coming both ways," he announced. Into the brush. From the east came 7 horsemen. From the west came 8 more. Then the firing began, and when it was over, 6 dead men lined the mudded trail. That was when the ranger decided he would not leave the Texas Badlands alive, not unless he could bring justice to an outlaw's land. Ranger Daring Bradford Scott of Pyramid Books, New York. A Pyramid Book first printing, January, 1971. This book is fiction. No resemblance is intended between any characters herein and any person, living or dead. Any such resemblance is purely coincidental. Copyright 1971 by Pyramid Publications. All rights reserved. Printed in the United States of America. Pyramid Books are published by Pyramid Publications, a division of the Walter Reed Organization, Incorporated, 444 Madison Avenue, New York, New York 10022, USA 1. The long cart train looked like a many-jointed worm as it rolled east toward the dark smoke smudge fouling the clean blue of the Texas sky. The smudge that always hung over the oil town of Echo. The carts were piled high with oil well casings and other oil well appurtenances. The well owners, grouped about the cart station, looked forward eagerly to the arrival of Miss Mary Merrill and her carts, for her winsome self, and for the badly needed materials her carts bore. The train rolled on, the smoke smudge growing steadily larger and darker. Another 20 minutes and the foremost cart pulled to a halt before the station, to the accompaniment of cheers from the assembled well owners and their workers, who would help with the unloading. There still being a couple of hours of daylight they would put to a good use. Bringing up the rear of the train was Miss Merrill, the owner. More cheers as she swung down from Rojo, her tall golden sorrel horse. "Golly, but she's a pretty girl," one of the owners said to a companion. "Never saw a prettier one." The owner showed real appreciation of feminine beauty. Astonishingly big eyes, the deep blue of Texas bluebells at twilight, a mop of curly black hair, a lot of it, and sweetly turned lips of vivid scarlet. She was a small girl, but her proportions left nothing to be desired. A creamy complexion and a straight little nose, the bridge powdered with a few freckles, completed the picture. Miss Mary Merrill was indeed easy on the eyes. Vince Rader, the owner of the big die-hard saloon close by, a favorite with the Carters, came hurrying to her. "Miss Merrill," he said, "there's one of the boys in my place and wants to see you. Says it's important." "Oh, good heavens," Mary moaned. "Can't people realize I'm a working woman? Here comes Saxon, my head carter, with his hands full of CHCCKSHCCTS, and I've got to give him help when the unloading starts, which will be in a few minutes. Maybe you'll recognize that fellow," Rader urged. "I think you'd better see him. Wants to brace me for a job." "The chances are," said Mary. "Oh, all right. Tell Saxon I'll be with him in a jiffy." "Fellows at a table by the dance floor," Rader called after her as she bounced on her way to the diehard. Mary waved her hand and kept going. Rader shook with laughter as soon as she was out of sight. Mary entered the saloon in no very good temper. She glanced around, spotted the pair at the table. One was lean, grizzled Tom Crane, the sheriff of the county, but the other, Mary shrieked. She shrieked again as she fairly flew across the room to the table. Another moment and Ranger Walt Slade, named by the pagans of the Rio Grande villages, El Halcon, the Hawk, enfolded her in a bear hug. "Darling, darling, darling," she chattered. "Oh, this is perfectly wonderful. I never dreamed you'd be back so soon. Why, you haven't been gone 2 weeks." "I didn't figure on being here so soon again," Slade replied. "This one is in the nature of a sequel to the chore I finished before leaving here last. I barely reached Ranger Post when I was turned around and headed right back here. You can blame Captain McNulty. He gives the orders." "Blame him," exclaimed Mary. "I could kiss him. Old Jim wouldn't mind," chuckled the sheriff. "He's got a twinkle in his eye when he looks at a pretty gal." The old Jim referred to was Captain James McNulty, the famed commander of the Boater Battalion of the Texas Rangers. "Sequel," Mary repeated. "What do you mean, Walt?" "That after we polished off Warrenclack, the outlaw killed who was reaching his bloody hands to grab the gold, black gold, that lies in the great, deeply seated oil pool to the north and east under the rangeland that you, Mary, now own. We thought that we might be in for a little well-deserved peace and quiet, which we certainly didn't experience after Clayt got going. He cut a wide swath hereabouts for a while, Not white enough to include El Halcon, the sheriff put in. Go ahead. Looked a little to me like our old amigo Fate, or something. Grew weary of Date's antics, Slade said. Anyhow, the split second before he would have fired the bullet that would have very likely given me my comeuppance, he was killed by a dynamite explosion triggered by a slug or the vibration set up by his own guns, and with him, those of his bunch grouped around him. Mary shuddered and changed the subject. What else did Captain have to tell you, Walt? She asked. He said, Slade replied, that while we may have eliminated Warren Clayton and his bunch, he has reliable information that another outfit is bad, or even worse, the McClate band is moving into the section. So he told me to hightail right back to where I came from and see what can be done about it. Trouble, sighed Mary, always trouble. No matter where you go, you can be depended on to get mixed up in trouble. I suppose there's no sense in worrying about you, though, as Esteban says, you always manage to come out on top. Char told the sheriff and received a severe pinch in retaliation. Mary jumped to her feet. I've got to get back to the station and give Saxon a hand. Still quite a while till dark, and he hopes to get a lot done. I think you'll find Westbrook Lerner is already there, lending a hand, the sheriff said. He's just like you, Walt, always right where he's needed most. Westbrook was a vigorous little man with a leathery, poreless skin, quick eyes, modest and unassuming. The casual observer would never guess his wealth and influence. He owned several producing wells in the Great Spindletop oil field near Beaumont, but he cared nothing about money except where it could be a help to others. With Walt Slade's advice, he opened up the Tumble Field, 20 miles to the south, and then the Echo. His big thrill was to bring in a new field, which was the real reason why he kept an eye on the great and very deep pool and toyed with the idea of developing machinery that would tap the pool. Now that reeling machinery in question was boring steadily into the stubborn earth, and it was with the assistance of General Manager Jaggers Dunn of the great C&P, that Walt Slade had procured and perfected the needed machinery. Among other things, a radio pump rotary drill that could drill in any direction, not just straight down like a dairy churn drill. It was much larger than any drill of that type the oil men had ever seen, and had other mechanical advantages, such as they had never seen. It was in the course of an attempt to destroy the drill that the outlaw chief, Warren Clayton, met to his death. Damage done to the equipment was not severe and had been repaired in less than a week. With characteristic generosity, Westbrook Lemur had thrown both fields wide open to anybody desiring to sink a well, keeping just enough potential wells and other property to ensure him a deciding vote in any civic matters that might come up. Many oil men at once took advantage of the offer. Lemur entered, shook hands with Slade, whom he greatly admired, nodded to the sheriff. I'm sending Mary to her room in my quarters to change and freshen up a bit, he said. Only half an hour or so till we'll knock off for the night. Soon be getting dark. We'll eat dinner here, except Esteban, our Yaqui Mexican knife man, who prefers to eat in the kitchen where he can visit a while with his amigos there. Okay, fine, the sheriff replied, and I'll just lay a foundation with a couple of snorts of red dye. Waiter. Lemur escorted Mary out and decided to accompany her to his quarters, which were not pretentious, but comfortable. An office with a desk and a couple of couch beds, a dining room and a kitchen. On the second floor were 2 bedrooms with hot and cold running water, and a small bath. Your room is all ship-shape, Walt, he said as they departed. Trust the cook and his boys to see to that, for to serve El Halcon is the honor great. Let's go, Mary. To reaching the quarters, Mary scampered upstairs. Lemur hurried back to the cart station, to give Saxon a hand with the final check sheets. After a bit he reappeared, sat down. All set, he announced. Finish up well before noon tomorrow, easy. Mary doesn't plan to roll the cards to Sanderson tomorrow. She's giving the boys the next day off so tonight they can do a little celebrating with the bonus money she gave them for the fast work they did. Plus what the well owners slipped in. That money will be burning holes in their pockets till it's spent. Business is going to pick up tonight in the Die Hard and other places, mostly the Die Hard, which is their favorite hangout. The carters arrived, with all the gentleness of a drunken tornado on the loose. The building rocked and swayed to their entrance. They bellowed greetings to Slade, the sheriff, and Lemur, as if they hadn't seen them for a week. Everybody within a square block knew the carters were in town. They crowded the bar and without delay got down to the serious business of drinking. They inspire me, said the sheriff. Waiter, a snort. Mary came bouncing in. She had changed to a short, spangled dance skirt that did not detract from her charms. "I'm starving," she wailed. "I haven't had a bite since we left Sanderson." Raider, the die-hard owner, waved to the kitchen, and out came the cook and his helpers, bobbing and grinning, to spread a snowy cloth on which they placed the dishes holding the savory dinner to which all did full justice. "That helped," said the sheriff, motioning the waiter for another snort. "Now I can really enjoy my drink, and as soon as you folks finish your drinks and smokes, I want to dance," Mary said. "Haven't had a really good dance since Walt was here. From the looks of that floor, you'd better be ready to do battle," Crane declared. "Ain't room to shuffle. We'll make out," the girl replied cheerfully. "Walt doesn't shove around easy." "Guess you should know," the sheriff agreed. Mary made a face at him, but both were outstanding dancers and they did very well on the crowded floor. However, after several numbers, Mary, breathless and rosy, was willing to take it easy for a while. Mary, the sheriff and Lemur chatted together. Slade was mostly silent, pondering the situation as it stood. He had been encountering developments somewhat different from any he had previously experienced in the course of his work as a ranger. The site of Echo was unique, reposing as it did on the level floor, thousands of acres in extent, of a great basin that had, some hundreds of millions of years before, been blasted into being by volcanic convulsions, of which there were still traces in the vicinity. Under the basin floor was a great oil pool not unduly difficult to tap, bearing witness, the forest of drilling derricks rising from the basin floor. One result of this development was plenty of loose money floating about in Echo, which, plus Echo's isolation, brought in an outlaw-type hitherto unknown to the section, with greater intelligence and experience, and familiar with big city methods which they put into effect with telling success. So far Ranger Walt Slade had more than held his own with these gentry, which meant he was not loved by the outlaw fraternity, who were endeavoring desperately to eliminate him in one way or another. So far with no success. Nonetheless, he felt they had plenty to think about, but he always had made out, so he was not going to do any needless worrying. He shoved the whole matter aside and joined in the conversation. Now the carters were really whooping it up, with plenty of help from other quarters. The railroaders, oil field workers, and business people were beginning to regard the carter a celebration in the nature of an institution and believe they should do their part to make it a success. "Listen to 'em beller," snorted the sheriff. "You'd think their throats would give out sometime. They'll be quiet, or something like it tomorrow," Mary predicted. "Come on, Walt, I'm rested, and I crave another dance." 3 more numbers on the now jammed floor and they were back at the table. "I really believe I'm getting old," Mary declared. "Half a dozen dances and I begin to gasp." "Sooner or later the old hound catches up with us," replied Crane. "Every now and then I'm sure I hear him baying on my track. You'll live to 100, Uncle Tom, and be just as ornery as you are?" "Now," Mary told him. The sheriff chuckled and didn't argue the point. With the others conversing animatedly, Slade did a little more pondering of Echo and its peculiarities. Formerly the only way across the bowl was by way of a very old trail that climbed the south slope, meandered across the bush-grown crest and down the opposite sag, to repeat the performance after crossing the basin to the north slope. The coming of the railroad changed that. Now there was a breakthrough that cut the slopes, south and north, and provided room beside the railroad right-of-way for horses or carts. Those breakthroughs had provided Slade with several adventures. Suddenly, right outside the saloon, sounded a crackle of shots, 2 evenly spaced reports, then a whole fusillade, a pad of running feet and, a moment later, a clatter of hoofs stemming southward. "Stay behind me, Tom," Slade snapped as he leaped to his feet and rushed to the swinging doors. As he reached the doors, he rocked back on his heels, flung open the doors and glanced swiftly left and right. Nothing happened. He hesitated an instant, stepped out, the cursing sheriff close behind him. Lying near the curb were 2 motionless forms about 10 feet apart. They had apparently been facing each other. Beside each lay a gun. Now heads were thrusting out cautiously from doors and porches. "What went on out here?" Slade demanded. The law speaking, Sheriff Crane present-day man stepped out of a doorway. "I saw it all, Sheriff," he announced. "Those 2 fellers laying on the ground there came walking along the street, toward each other. All of a sudden they started shooting. The smaller one sort of flopped down as 3 more jiggers bulged around the hip crack, all shooting at the bigger of the dead ones. I'd say, He kinda crumpled up. The three dodged back around the rack and forked horses tethered there, and away they went. "Did you recognize anybody?" Slade asked. The informant shook his head. "Don't recall ever seeing any of them before," he replied. Another witness stepped up. "I know the big one," he said. "Remember having him pointed out to me. Rather, he owned a couple of wells down to the south edge of the field. Don't remember anybody saying his name." Slade walked slowly past the bodies, glancing down at them. "Big one shot to pieces, 5 bullet holes in his breast," he said to the sheriff. "Little one stopped one slug, dead center. A lot like those killings I told you about," remarked Crane. Mary and Lemur joined them. The girl had thrown a cloak over her dancing costume, and had one hand in a pocket, grasping, Slade knew very well, a cocked gun. "Put the hammer down before you add somebody to the collection," he cautioned. Deputy Arbois, who had charge of the sheriff's echo office, appeared. A number of the carters had boiled out to see what was going on, and he enlisted a crew to pack the bodies to the office, where they would be given a careful examination. Slade and the sheriff returned with Mary and Lemur to their table. Nothing more they could do at the moment. They did learn from Raider that the dead well owner's name was Birdnell, Jason Birdnell, but he had been just one among so many owners that Raider recalled very little concerning him. Didn't drink a great deal, didn't talk much, but seemed all right. Certainly made no trouble. Maybe a private feud of some sort, hazarded the sheriff. Slade didn't differ from him, vocally, at least. A little later another eyewitness to the shooting had something to impart he thought Slade might consider interesting. That big well owner was packing a poke of something under his arm when he was shot. He dropped it when he fell and one of the three that shot him picked it up. Slade thanked the informant and turned to the sheriff who was muttering under his mustache. "On the surface, at least, it's beginning to look like a successful robbery attempt, again like the one you told me about," he said. "Yep, looks that way," Crane agreed. "Appears quite obvious," Slade added, "but somehow I'm always a mite suspicious of the obvious." "Usually with good reason," interjected Mary. She glanced at the clock. There was still plenty of business in the Die Hard, but there is a limit to what even brawny carters can endure, and they had been up and active since dawn. They began drifting out, somewhat subdued, comparatively speaking. Mary glanced at the clock again. So did Raider. He was getting ready to sound his last call. Mary slipped her cloak over her dancing costume. The sheriff called for a final snort. He would spend the night at Raider's place. Estevan looked in from the kitchen, bowed to Al Hossi 6N, who nodded. Slate and the others called goodnight to everybody. Raider sounded his last call. With the gold of the dawn blushing the east, Slate and Mary and Lemur headed for the oil magnate's quarters and a much-needed rest. Soon it would be day 3 the following day. The killing of Birdnell, the well owner, and the unknown outlaw was freely discussed. The consensus of opinion held it to be a plain case of robbery and murder, a deplorably frequent occurrence in Echo. One angle, Slade felt, might be of significance, the fact that nobody appeared to know anything about Birdnell. He had bought his wells from former owners, too common a practice to occasion comment. Wells were always changing hands. Slade managed to learn that he had paid for them in cash, a not inconsiderable outlay. Where he got the money and just where he came from was not known. In an Echo it was not considered good form to ask too many pointed questions. A man's past was his own affair, so long as he didn't intrude it on others, all of which did not tend to simplify the law enforcement officer's task. "Never know who's who or what until something cuts loose," growled the sheriff. "And you figure that well owner was something different than he set up to be?" "I really have no reason for saying so, but I've a hunch he very well might have been," Slade replied. "Well, chances are we'll find out, and possibly not particularly enjoy the finding. He might have been bucking the outfit Captain McNulty spoke about." "Here we go again," groaned Crane, following another hunch. "Well, one thing is sure for certain, they bust up the monotony. Let's go eat and drink." However, despite the sheriff's pessimistic grumbling, the day passed peacefully. The Carters, after their night of celebration and a hard tomorrow coming up, were reasonably subdued, and everybody called it an early night. Well before noon the following day, the long train of empty carts rolled through the railroad cut and onto the prairie under an overcast sky, with dark clouds rising slowly in the southeast. With the train rode Slade, Estevan, and the sheriff. The Carters were again in a jubilant mood and bellowed and sang until birds in the thickets called indignant protest. From Echo to Sanderson was level prairie, save where the grasslands were cut by 4 stands of brakes, the heavy chaparral growth and occasional tall trees encroaching on the trail that flowed through them, the trail the carts would follow. In the second cart from the front sat Saxon, a fat money poke beside him, a rifle cradled across his knees. He did not really expect trouble, but he was taking no chances. That poke held the money paid by the wheel owners for the materials the carts brought from Sanderson, no small sum. With the carts rode Slade, Esteban and the sheriff. Slade didn't like the looks of that cloud bank in the southeast. A Gulf storm at this time of the year was often nothing to bargain with. Like Saxon, he did not expect trouble, except probably from the elements, but he too was taking no chances and rode vigilant and alert. As they neared the first line of brakes, he and Esteban scouted ahead to enter the stand of growth well in front of the train. They rode slowly, peering and listening, but they saw nothing save an occasional little animal scurrying across from one stand of growth to another. Heard nothing save the infrequent chirping of birds. "I don't fancy the way the critters are acting," Slade said. "They're holding up and batting down their hatches, as is their custom when there's really bad weather brewing. Oh, well, I reckon we'll make out. A rip-snorting Gulf storm will be as bad for the outlaws as for us, if there happen to be any outlaws around. As Capitan says, so it will be," replied Esteban, caressing the haft of his blade. They rode on and reached the west end of the break with nothing untoward taking place. The rangeland was now almost as gloomy as it trailed through the break, with a great purple cloud rolling toward the zenith, with flickers of lightning zigzagging across its sable breast. Outside the break they drew rein and watched the train rumble past. Mary and the sheriff had pulled ahead beside Saxon, shaking their heads as they gazed at the cloud. "It sure didn't look good. May pass over," the sheriff remarked hopefully. "Going to move ahead, Walt?" "What about me? You stay back with Mary until we pass through the second stand of brakes," Slade decided. "Come on, Esteban." He and the knifeman sped ahead over the darksome prairie. They reached the second break, eased through it cautiously, and were again on the open rangeland, which was even drearier than that which preceded it. "We'll catch it in the third or the beginning of the fourth," Slade predicted. They once again drew rein and waited until Mary and the sheriff were beside them. "And so far no outlaws," Slade said. "When we're inside the third break, begin closing up on us. If we get through the third, we'll head for the fourth. I don't think we'll reach the third without at least some rain, but we'll chance it. Let's go, Esteban." But the storm, with the usual contrariness of Gulf storms, evidently decided to hold up for a while. They reached the outer straggle of the fourth break without a drop of rain falling, although the wind was rising steadily. The sheriff had joined them and all three were ready for business. With the carts far behind, they entered the break, riding slowly, Slade listening intently for any alien sound. They were almost through the dense chaparral stand when he abruptly pulled to a halt. "They're here, just a few paces ahead of us, on the other side of the trail. I heard a bit iron jingle. Unfork, and leave the horses. They'll stand, ease into the brush and creep along. As soon as we are opposite them, Tom, announce yourself." He led the way, slowly, cautiously, on foot. Another moment and they should be able to see the devils. Just another step, now, and it happened. A blinding blaze of yellowish light, a crashing explosion that shook the very earth. Another dazzling blaze, a bellowing roar. Blue flame crackled through the treetops, ran hissing along the ground. The hellish Gulf storm had arrived. The lightning flamed. The thunder burst the air. Again the volcano of the lightning erupted. That second of intense glare revealed a group of mounted men on the far side of the trail. They spotted the posse at the same instant and were going for their holsters as the darkness swooped down. "Let them have it," Slade blared, shooting with both hands, as were Esteban and the sheriff. Gunfire added its quota to the general pandemonium. Slade's marvelous hearing caught the beat of hoofs on the hard surface of the trail, and when the lightning again flared, there was nobody to be seen on the far side of the trail. The outlaws had hightailed away from there, their frantic horses glad to run in A&V direction. "Hold it, Star One," Slade shouted. "Hold it, they're gone." Pursuit was of course out of the question. "Anybody hurt?" Slade asked anxiously. "The devil shot over us," whooped the sheriff. Old Hunker Down paid off again, as was a habit with the infernal things. The storm ceased almost as suddenly as it had begun. The lightning toned down to flickers. The thunder rolled away into the north. Another moment and sunlight funneled through the clouds, and around a bend to the east rumbled the cart train. Everybody was pretty well soaked. Not even good slickers were able to cope with that downpour, but in a jubilant temper as the train boomed out into the bright sunshine that would quickly dry persons and garments, Slade spared the far side of the trail a perfunctory glance that discovered nothing and didn't expect to, for he was certain that none of their slugs, fired at random through the dark, had connected. Just as well, he felt. He was positive in his own mind that it was an outlaw bunch set to raid a train, but it could have been, scant chance, a group of harmless cowhands seeking shelter from the storm. The train ground to a halt. Explanations were demanded. The sheriff responded, to the accompaniment of cheers. "Thank heaven nobody was hurt," said Mary, "and," she told the carters, "when we get back to Echo you'll get an extra bonus to make up for what you went through today." The cheers that this pleasant intelligence set off caused the prairie dogs to think another thunderstorm was in the works. The rest of the trip to Sanderson was devoid of excitement, although it was past sunset when they finally reached the railroad town. The carts were lined for loading, the horses stabled and the carters boomed into it. The branding pen for food and drink. Slade and Mary repaired to their reserved rooms to freshen up a bit and change to clean and dry clothes. Esteban holed up in the kitchen. Saxon joined the others at the bar. Slade waited for Mary and they reached the branding pen together, the carters whooping greetings. The girl declared she was starved. Hard Rock Hogan, the owner, hurried to the kitchen where the cook had a really excellent dinner ready. Nothing was too good for El Halcon and his señorita, the Mexican cook and his helpers insisted, so they enjoyed a very pleasant meal without interruption and showed their appreciation by cleaning the dishes to the last spoonful. Slade smoked while Mary chatted with the sheriff, who had returned from a quick visit to his casa and a bite with his old cook. A man entered, a fairly tall man with straight features, a rather dark complexion, and hair almost as black as Slade's. He nodded to the sheriff, who returned the greeting and made his way to the bar. "By gosh, there's a feller I wanted to speak to you about," said Crane. "Slipped my mind. Who is he, and what about him?" Slade replied. "Name's Bard, Dane Bard," the sheriff answered. "A half-owner of one of the Birdnell wells, a rather big one. Reckon he'll take over full ownership with Birdnell dead quite likely, unless some Birdnell relatives show up and claim ownership," Slade said. "Reckon that's so," Crane conceded. "Don't know anything much about him other than I just told you. Looks like he's been riding in the rain. Dresses more like a cowhand than a well owner." "Please," Mary broke in, "please forget Mr. Bard for a while. I want to dance." Slade was agreeable, for he was not particularly interested in Mr. Dane Bard who, after all, was a rather commonplace appearing individual. Any number of such in this section of Texas. Slade felt he was probably quite capable in his line of business, whatever that might be, apparently. Oil, Mary and Slade danced a few numbers, but it had been a long, hard, and nerve-wracking day, with another coming up tomorrow, for the carters were anxious to start loading right after daybreak, so that by early afternoon, they could be rolling to Echo in their favorite hangout, the Die Hard. So everybody called it an early night. The following morning, with Mary and the carters busy loading, Slade and the sheriff sat in the office and discussed matters, the situation in general. "Figure the headman of the pack was with those devils yesterday?" Crane asked, from the way they took instant advantage of their opportunity to escape. "I'm inclined to think so," Slade replied. "Was mighty fast and accurate thinking on somebody's part. Made their move between lightning flashes, when it was almost black night under the trees. Yes, I feel pretty sure the head hellion, whoever he is, was handling the chore in person. Anyhow, thanks to you, they missed hanging on to a nice haul," the sheriff said. "The storm wouldn't have been enough to stop them. Might even have worked in their favor." Slade was forced to admit it probably had been so. "Yes, they lost out on a good one they thought was in the bag," he said, "which means they'll be out to even the score in one way or another. We've got to be on our toes every minute. I fear we are up against a very smart killer bunch. My money's still on El Halcon," was the cheerful reminder. "Where's my bottle? Let us drink." Slade compromised on a cup of coffee, steaming hot, from the stove in the back room. For quite some time they sat sipping and smoking, each busy with his own thoughts. Crane finally broke the silence. "Just got to wondering what that well owner, Dane Bard, was doing in Sanderson," he remarked, his hand out as echo. "Possibly something to do with his Birdnell inheritance," Slade replied. "Maybe some legal matters involved." "Reckon that's so," Crane conceded. "Well, good luck to him. He seems to be all right." Slade nodded. The sheriff glanced at the clock. "Don't you think we'd better be ambling down to the station?" he suggested. "Knock off a bite to eat and a snort or two before the carts roll, which will be soon." "Now," Slade agreed, and they set out, walking slowly through the crowded streets, for they found Mary and Saxon busy with the cleaning up of the last loading details. Those were quickly finished and they joined Slade and the sheriff in the branding pen, with the whooping carters hard on their heels. Hefty snacks and drinks for all, and out of Sanderson rolled a long train of heavily loaded carts. As is often the case in that section, the day following the storm was beautiful. The grasses were a sea of smoky purple, with flashes of russet and gold. The hills marched sedately. Even the first of the breaks looked cheerful, quite in contrast to their grim threat of the night before. "Good to be alive on such a day," Mary said, reining Rojo in close to Shadow. "Listen to the birds," raising a chorus above even the carters bellowing, filled with happiness. It was so, and even the stolid cart horses snorted and tossed their heads and jingled their bit irons in sheer joy of living. Nevertheless, Slade was taking no chances. He and Esteban scouted the stand of brakes, ahead of the train. It seemed out of all reason to even think anybody would try to attack the loaded train, but of late the ridiculous was in the ascendancy in the section. He and Esteban scouted as if they expected outlaws behind every tree. If there were, which Slade doubted, they were careful to keep out of sight. The second stand received a similar treatment, with a similar result. Everything lovely and peaceful, Mary exulted. "TM willing to wager it will be this way clear to Echo. What do you think, Walt?" "I say hope for the best and take precautions against the worst," the ranger replied. "You're getting to be as much a pessimist as Uncle Tom," Mary chided. "I walk on the bright side and hope hard enough, and that's the way it will be." Slade hoped she was right, but did not relax his vigilance as the third stand came into view. Darker now that the sun was low and the smoke smudge over Echo staining the blue of the sky. The third stand, with nothing untoward happening. Outside the stand Slade reined in to let the carts catch up, which they did before long. "One more to go," he said to the sheriff. "Figure you'd better come along this time, Tom." "Right," agreed Crane instantly. "As Esteban says, the fun I do not wish to miss." They rode ahead at a fast pace, leaving Mary and Saxon looking anxious. Before long the fourth and last stand was to be seen, a dark shadow against the green of the grasslands. Slade gazed steadily toward it. A few more paces and he slowed Shadow to a walk. A little more and he halted the big horse. "What is it?" the sheriff asked. "Birds," Slade replied. "See there over the chaparral." "I can't see anything except what looks to be a patch of haze," Crane answered. Esteban nodded agreement. But the eyes of El Halcon saw very plainly the tiny dots darting and swooping, sinking, rising, but never settling. "Something's got them bothered," Slade explained. "Something they don't understand and fear. They're acting just as they do when the carts roll under their perches. And you figure there's some devils holed up there and waiting for us to show." "I'm so much of that opinion," Slade said, "that we're going to veer to the south a bit. We are not going to enter the breaks by way of the trail. Just south of the trail is heavy growth. But it is possible to ease along parallel to the trail, if we are careful, and get the jump on those enterprising Drigglechur gents, if there are some in the bush hugging the trail, and I think there are. From the trail the ground slopes up a bit, which should put us at an advantage. Of course," he added, "they may hear us coming and be all set to blow us from under our hats, willing to take a chance." "You're darn right, itching too," growled Crane. Said Esteban, "My blade thirsts." "Let's go," Slade said, and spoke to Shadow, who veered his nose slightly south and ambled along composedly. After a little while, Slade veered to the north. "I don't think that this way we're in much danger of being spotted," he said. "We'll coast along the edge of the growth until we're as close to where the trail enters the chaparral as I consider advisable. It's highly unlikely that the Drigglechurs will be outside the opening or even real near its mouth. They wouldn't risk being seen, did they? Figure somebody might be keeping an eye out for them, and they can hear the carts coming while they are quite a way off. So, the way I see it, they'll be holed up some distance from the mouth, very likely where the trail begins to bend a bit. That would be the ideal spot for them to do their going. Everything understood?" "Okay, and if the ball does open, hunker down and shoot fast and straight. Speed up some now." They reached the outer straggle of the growth, curbed their horses to a slow walk, until Slade deemed they were as near the trail as was advisable. Then he cautiously put Shadow to the slight slope that rose from the trail. Shadow, who was familiar with such maneuvers, knew just how to conduct himself. The same went for Eskven's wiry little Mustang. The sheriff's mount, a quietly moving cayuse, kept close to the others, 100 paces, or very near it, and Slade slowed the advance still more. Now the wary horses were barely putting 1 foot ahead of the others. The still disturbed birds were wheeling and chirping, which convinced El Halcon that the Drigglchin killers were all set in position to mow down their unsuspecting victims. Slade heard them first, of course, but almost as quickly as Esteban and the sheriff also were aware of the rough voices rising in low mutters from almost below where the posse crouched after deftly unforking and moving away a little from the standing horses, who could be depended on to stay right where they were. It was quite shadowy on the trail now, and in the distance sounded the rumble of the approaching carts. And at that moment the Drigglchers stepped into view at the edge of the trail, poised for the attack. There were 6 of them, and at that moment one of the wheeling birds darted right past the sheriff's standing horse, almost brushing its nose with beating wings. The horse, not unnaturally, threw back its head and let loose an explosive snort. The Drigglchers whirled at the sound, going for their holsters as they spotted the posse. "Let them have it," Slade thundered, and drew and shot with both hands. Crane and Esteban already had their guns out and blazing. 2 Drigglchers fell under that first volley. But the others were hard men and, taken by surprise though they were, fought back viciously. With the odds in their favor, the situation was far from good, from the viewpoint of the little posse. Then around a bend boomed the cart train, Saxon and Mary shooting. Caught in a deadly crossfire, the outlaws never had a chance. In little more than seconds there were 6 motionless forms lying in the dust of the trail. By sheer bellowing, Slade finally got the shooting stopped, the wasting of slugs hammering the dead bodies. Mary sent Rojo charging to him. "You all right?" she asked anxiously. "Everybody fine," he replied, "which wouldn't have been the case were it not for you arriving at the opportune moment as you did. Things were getting uncomfortably warm. We heard the shooting, of course, and knew what it meant and didn't waste any time getting around the bend," she said. "What was it all about?" "Just a little try to even up for what happened the day of the storm," was Slade's explanation. "Think one of those sidewinders on the ground is the headman?" the sheriff put in hopefully. "I'd say not," Slade answered. "He'd hardly have taken part in the raid, knowing there were bound to be witnesses left and that he might be recognized. I think he delegated this chore to his hired hands, who didn't have much luck." "Would have had luck were it not for El Halcon," declared Crane, and launched into a graphic account of what was done. "Anybody else would have barged into the trap," he concluded, "but Walt sprung their own trap on them. Well, load them into a cart and we'll decorate the office floor with them when we get to Echo. Let's go." "I crave a snort, and I'm starving," Mary said, "and I'm not letting either of you and Esteban out of my sight till we reach town." The bodies were loaded, hard case Hellions, and the train rolled out of the gloom of the brakes and into the dying sunlight. Everybody was in a gay mood. The carters whooped and sang, and even the taciturn sheriff, visioning snorts of red-eye in the near future, rumbled hoarsely in his hairy throat. Across the prairie, through the railroad cut, an arousing welcome from assembled well owners as the long train halted at a station. The cart packing the outlaw bodies pulled out of the line to deposit the carcasses in the sheriff's office, where Deputy Arbor received them. Slade and the sheriff would give them a careful examination later. The work of unloading began at once, the carters figuring to get an hour at least of work done before dark, with a double bonus from Mary plus 1 from the owners to be spent. They wanted to be free of their responsibilities as quickly as possible. "Be finished by noon tomorrow at the latest," Mary predicted as she and Saxon riffled tally sheets. With the horses cared for, Slade and the sheriff entered the Die Hard. Raider, the owner, had already dispatched a waiter to Mary and Saxon with coffee and sandwiches to tide them over until they were ready for dinner. The carters were too busy to eat, or even drink. Esteban was in the Die Hard kitchen with his amigos there, hoping to learn something from them that would be of service to Capitan Westbrook Lemur, the oil magnate, came hurrying in. "I'll give Mary and Saxon a hand and send her to her room in my quarters so she can freshen up a little and rest for an hour or so before eating," he said, and hurried out. While waiting, Slade had coffee, the sheriff a couple of snorts. The carters had spread around the story of the frustrated Drigglchin, and Slade was favored with smiles and nods and admiring glances from Die Hard patrons, of which there were quite a few already, although it was not yet full dark, with more constantly coming in. The carters rode in, their work for the day finished, and all set for heck raising. To start with, they lined the bar and demanded drinks, plenty of them. Mary arrived sooner than expected. I got so hungry I couldn't rest, she explained. Did manage to change to a dancing skirt for Walt's benefit. He doesn't like to dance with a girl in overalls. Her carters were whooping greetings, to which she waved acknowledgement. Look at them, she said, having been up and working since daybreak. You'd think they would crave rest. Not them. They'll be raring to go until the last dog's dead, as Uncle Tom says. Lemur entered and joined them, and, bowing low to Ilhalkn, the cook and his helpers marched in with their dinner, which they consumed in leisurely comfort, paying scant heed to the hullabaloo at the bar. After he finished eating, Slade went back to the kitchen to thank the cook and his boys, leaving them happy. He never forgets the little people, Mary murmured. I don't think really big men ever do, replied Lemur. Mary smiled, for the unassuming oil magnate practiced what he preached. He too was one of the big men who never forgot. Well, aside from that harmless heck raising at the bar, it looks like we might have a peaceful night, Lemur said to Slade. I hope so, the ranger replied. TVE had enough excitement for one day. Guess we'd better amble over to the office and give those bodies a onco VCR, Tom, he told the sheriff. Yep, let's get it over, Crane agreed. Be just a waste of time, chances are. Let's go. An examination justified the sheriff's remark. All six, Slade said, had once been cowhands but hadn't worked at it for quite some time. Their pockets realized a small amount of money. Slade had already decided that their horses, which had been combed out of the brush and brought along with the carts, bore slick iron Texas panhandle burns, which meant nothing. Slade agreed with Crane and Arbois that all the slain Alhoots were ornery-looking hellions, but quite typical of their brand, with nothing distinctive about them. Arbois promised to make arrangements to have them packed to Sanderson, so the coroner could hold an inquest. Arbois decided to remain at the office a while to give the curious a chance to look over the bodies. Somebody might recall something of interest relative to them. Slade and the sheriff returned to the Die Hard, where Mary and Lemur were chatting together. Here comes Dane Bard, the well owner, Crane remarked. Must have left Sanderson shortly after we did. Looks tired. Guess that goes for everybody, Slade commented. Even the carters aren't yelling as loud as they were. But I do feel up to a couple of turns on the dance floor, Mary said. They did several numbers, but it was growing late. Saxon glanced at Mary, who nodded. He herded his charges out, still raising a racket, as they felt duty-bound to do. Other patrons followed them. Raider, with a glance around, sounded his last call. Slade, Lemur, and Mary headed for the magnate's quarters, Estevan drifting along behind. The sheriff would sleep in Raider's casa. Soon the Die Hard was dark. The following morning Slade and the sheriff felt they were still in the dark. Figuratively speaking, they had not the slightest idea as to who was the headman of the outlaws. Both considered it imperative that they learn his identity, if they wished to stay alive. Oh, well, we'll work out, always does, said Crane. Now what's your next move? I think I'll ride through the North Cut and have a look at the big assembly yard that's being built. I promised Mr. Dunn that I would, so the boys will get some pointers from the best engineer that ever rode across Texas. Remarked the sheriff, a slight exaggeration, I fear. Slade smiled. Not a bit of it, not a bit of it, Crane declared stoutly. Not while since like General Manager Dunn of the Great C. and P Railroad System, millionaire and former Texas Governor Jim Hogg, and John Wayne bet $1,000,000 Gates of Wall Street say so. Till string along with those gents any day. The sheriff did not exaggerate too much in his broad statement. Shortly before the death of his father, which occurred after financial reverses that entailed the loss of the elder Slade's ranch, young Walt had graduated with high honors from a famed college of engineering. He had hoped to take a postgraduate course in certain subjects to round out his education and better fit him for the profession he planned to make his life work. That, however, was out of the question for the time being, and Slade was not sure as to what would be his next move. So when Captain Jim McNulty, the famous commander of the Boulder Battalion of the Texas Rangers, with whom Slade had worked some during summer vacations, suggested that he sign up with the Rangers for a while and complete his studies in spare time, Slade thought the idea good, so Walt Slade became a Texas Ranger. Long since, He had gotten more from private study than he could have hoped for from the postgrad, was eminently fitted for the profession of engineering, and had received offers of lucrative employment from such giants of the railroad, business, and financial worlds as Dunn, Hogg, and Gates, among others. But meanwhile ranger work had gotten a strong hold on him. It provided so many opportunities to help the deserving, right wrongs, bring malefactors to justice, and make a land he loved an even better land for good people. He was loath to sever connections with the illustrious body of law enforcement officers. He was young, plenty of time to be an engineer. He'd stick with the Rangers for a while longer, something he had been explaining to himself for quite a while now, and realizing one doesn't stay young indefinitely. Mind if I go along to the yard with you?" the sheriff asked as Slade stood up. "Glad to have you," Slade replied. "Always like to have good company." When they reached the yard, Slade was favorably impressed with the progress that had been made. The big machine shop was almost completed. The same went for the roundhouse and 2 tall gravity humps, and a trio of long sidings to accommodate the loaded cars that would be coming down from the north. "You are to be congratulated," Slade told the construction engineer in charge. "Mr. Dunn is going to be very pleased when he hears about it," which pleased the engineer greatly. Slade glanced at the sun which had crossed the zenith, waved to some of the workers who knew him and were calling greetings. "Well, Tom, guess we'd better amble down to the diehard," he said. "The boys will have finished with their unloading, and Mary will begin to wonder if we've gotten lost in the shuffle." Saying so long to the engineer, they set out through the cut, letting the horses choose their own gait, the sun being quite warm. Reaching the stable, they cared for the critters and then worked their way through the crowded streets to the diehard. The carters had finished their unloading and were all set to begin their celebration. Mary was awaiting them, Lemur and Saxon keeping her company. She had a warm greeting for both. "The boys are getting smart," she remarked. "How's that?" Slade asked. "They are all having something to eat before they start drinking," she explained. "They realize they can drink more on a full stomach." "That's the idea, a damn good idea," said the sheriff. "Waiter." The waiter seemed to think so, too, for he smiled and bobbed as he pocketed a generous tip. Yes, the carters were taking it easy at the minute, but everybody knew that wouldn't last. Business was due to pick up shortly, and Slade was confident that a wild night was in the making. He rather hoped so, for such might provide him with the opportunity of one sort or another that he felt he sorely needed. And the terrible setback the outlaws suffered the day before might cause them to do something reckless in a frantic endeavor to even the score. Slade reasoned that the headman of the pack might well be getting a trifle jumpy and not so sure of his standing with his followers. However, one good haul would be all he'd need to restore confidence. Slade had seen it happen before. Looked like the weather had decided to cooperate, in one way or another, with somebody. The morning sunlight had vanished, for now the sky was overcast, and getting more so. "Going to rain again, sure as blazes," growled the sheriff. "Hope it won't turn out to be another Gulf storm. We can do without that. Think it might work to our advantage, Walt." "Could be, hard to tell," Slade replied. "Such conditions usually favor the outlaws, but not always. Anyhow, it's beginning to get dark out. And I'm getting hungry," was Mary's plaint. "That will be taken care of shortly," Slade promised. "And whether or no weather, your carters are beginning to come to life. Another half hour and they'll be going strong. Estevan's holed up in the kitchen, but I figure he won't be there long. Be out scouting any minute now. Hope he manages to tie onto something," remarked Crane. "Yes," Slade agreed. "We can use a little assistance. He's the boy too." "Hand it out," said Lemur. "They don't come any better." To which there was general agreement. Slade remembered his promise to Mary and caught the owner's eye. Raidner nodded and made his way to the kitchen where the cook and his helpers were already quite busy. Soon the results of their labors were placed on the table and voted prime. Now the carters were really going strong. The din was deafening, the smoke thick. Slade breathed deeply and got a lungful of tobacco that made him cough. He felt he'd taken about all he could for the moment. Mary and Lemur were dancing. The sheriff was conversing with Raidner. Slade shot a glance around and eased out the door. Pleasantly cool by contrast, and more room for the smoke to dissipate, which was a decided relief. He sauntered along slowly through the crowded streets, working his way north toward the railroad cut, pausing briefly at a few places. As he neared the cut, he came upon a stage station, one of several in Echo that serviced coaches from the east and north, including one from The town of Richton. The station was usually referred to as the Richton Station. Slade knew the station master and decided to drop in for a word with him. They chatted for quite a while about a number of things, nothing much in particular, until abruptly the master said, "Walt, here's something I thought may interest you. The ramshackle old coach from Richton seldom has a guard riding with the driver. Almost never, in fact, but tonight there will be a guard on the driver's seat with the driver, and another guard inside the coach. What do you know about that?" "Richton is the center of a very prosperous farming area," Slade replied. "No telling what those farmers, with always plenty of money in their pockets, will do." "Guess that's so," the master agreed. "Word was sent me to put them up for the night, those two guards, and send them back with the coach tomorrow." Slade nodded and changed the subject, but, although the master didn't know it, he had started El Halcon doing some thinking. "What time does the Richton stage arrive at Echo?" he asked casually. 11 o'clock, if it keeps up its schedule, which it most always does," answered the master. A little more conversation and Slade told the master good night and departed. As he left the building, a shadow detached from other shadows and approached him. He did not need to be told it was Esteban, and the knifeman's eyes were glowing. "Capitan, it may mean naught, for people ride through the cut, although seldom so late on a dark night, but while you talked, 8 men did ride through and past the assembly yard. I could not be this sure, the night being very dark, but I think they rode on east by north." "Does it interest Capitan?" "Yes, it does," Slade replied. "Okay, well head for the diehard, and you keep in touch." "Of a certainty," Capitan the knifeman answered, his eyes even brighter and seeming to snap. When they reached the diehard, they found both deputies present, for which Slade was duly thankful. He figured that if things worked out the way he expected them to, they were going to have the odds decidedly against them, even with Blount and Arbaugh to complete the posse. In detail, Slade recounted what he learned from the Richton station master. His hearers were at once enthusiastic. "Yep, that stage will be packing money, all right. I'm willing to bet on it," said the sheriff, "and our outlaw hellions will be making a try for it." "What you got lined up, Walt?" Slade pondered for a few minutes. "I'd say the logical place for making a try, if they really intend to, is somewhere around where the trail leaves the south edge of the stand of breaks just north and east of the assembly yard. The trail, after crossing the prairie for miles, cuts through the stand of breaks. The growth is tall and thick, but the stand is not so very wide. Everything from the north and east passes through it, including, of course, the stage from Richton. Hold up in the bush close to where the trail leaves breaks. The advantage of position should be ours, which is decidedly important, with the odds against us as they'll be." The others were still enthusiastic. Slade proceeded to cool their ardor a little. "Of course all this is pure surmise on my part," he pointed out. "The devils may have something else in mind, maybe out on prairie for some reason or other, where they will be able to sec everything. Or, if they are real smart, and going to make a try for the stage, as I figure, concentrating their attention on the north and east, they have somebody to watch to the south and there'll be a nice little reception awaiting us." His hearers looked a little uneasy at these ominous predictions, but the sheriff voiced the consensus of opinion. "With El Halcon handling things there's nothing to worry about," he said. "Let us eat." Which they proceeded to do, with appetite, full-fed and content, with pipe and cigarettes going strong. They relaxed in comfort, little affected by the heck-raising at the bar, where the carters were now in full stride. "Remember the attempt to rob the Stockton stage we smashed?" Crane remarked. "That one was something like this, but not so complicated," Slade replied. "A bright moonlight night, a straight trail we could see for more than a mile. All we had to do was hole up comfortably and wait for the owl hoots to show, which they did, and ended up floor decorations," said the sheriff complacently. "Figure it to be just the same this time," he added. "Here's hoping." Slade smiled. A little later he glanced at the clock, turned and glanced to the kitchen, where the cook who had been watching by the door nodded. Slade stood up. "Esteban has been notified and we better be moving," he said. "Plenty of time, but we'll want to get set." "Do you figure to be back before morning?" Mary asked. "I certainly do," he answered. "By shortly after midnight we should have gotten done all we have to do, and be on our way back to our decorations," said the cheerful sheriff. Mary sighed and shook her curls resignedly. "I'll keep her company till you get back," Lemur promised. "Thanks," Slade said. "That helps. Let's go, boys." Reaching the stable, they found Esteban awaiting them, so without delay they cinched up and started riding through the railroad cut. They passed the assembly yard, which was normally busy, and headed east by north. The rain that had been threatening all evening failed to materialize. The sky was still overcast, but the rack was thinning and the prairie was bathed in a silvery sheen which, Slade uneasily admitted to himself, rendered a large object visible for quite some distance, a horse for instance, especially a mounted and moving horse. Well, there was nothing he could do about it but hope the outlaws, were they really around, were not keeping a sharp watch on the south. The breaks came into view, shadowy in the distance. Slade concentrated on them. With their sudden movement there he would note it. He rode on, eyes to the front, the others crowding behind him, gazing apprehensively toward the black block of shadow wherein death lurked, a block of shadow that was beginning to take on definite form although still some distance away. Abruptly, Slade's head jerked up. "What in blazes?" he exclaimed. "Huh, what?" barked the sheriff. "Somebody, somewhere slipped up," Slade replied. "The stage is just entering the far side of the breaks, long before it's supposed to be due. Speed up, speed up. If we don't get there in time, somebody will die." Trail, shadow, trail. The great horse lunged forward, but almost immediately Slade was forced to curb him a bit. The others couldn't keep up. The race with death was on. 6 in the breaks the Richton stage rolled along, the clumsy, 4-horse vehicle rocking and swaying on the hard surface of the trail, tires grinding the stones. The driver and the outside guard laughed and chatted, the inside guard now and then flinging up a word or two. The south mouth of the trail opening drew nearer with everything peaceful and serene, or so it seemed. Suddenly the lead horses fell, screaming their pain and fright, kicking, pawing. They tried to scramble erect through a tangle of broken harness. The wheelers, trying to avoid slashing hoofs, swung around sideways, cramping the front wheels against the side of the coach. Over went the top of the contraption to slam against the encroaching growth. The driver and the outside guard were hurled into the brush like stones. From a sling, the inside guard raved curses. From the chaparral on the far side of the trail rode 8 masked men, shooting at the slantingly overturned coach, and into the trail opening roared Walt Slade and his posse, guns blazing. 2 outlaws fell at that first bellowing volley. The others tried desperately to fight back, but taken utterly by surprise, their horses practically unmanageable, their very numbers hampering them, they had little chance of success. Slade's Colts boomed and there were 3 motionless forms in the dust of the trail. The sheriff and the deputies were firing as fast as they could squeeze trigger. Esteban's knife slivered through the murk, and there were 4 down, 5 as the sheriff's bullet caught another owl who dead center, ducking, dodging in his saddle, shadow doing a weird, slithering dance. Slade fired again, and down went number 6. It was a slaughter grim and great. Abruptly, Slade held his fire, shouting to the others to do likewise, for there was nothing to shoot at. The 2 remaining raiders were in full flight. Trying to catch up with them would be taking a needless risk, for they could turn off anywhere and have a pursuer at their mercy. And mercy was something they didn't know the meaning of, and Slade felt he and his companions had done very well. 6 out of 8 not at all bad. The grinning Esteban had produced a lantern from his saddle pouch, and by its light the scene of carnage was given a sketchy once-over. The driver and the outside guard crawled out of the bush with only a few scratches as a result of their experience. The inside guard had managed to get the upper door of the overturned coach open, and after peering out cautiously had climbed out, a fat money pouch under his arm, a slight bump on the side of his head. With the medicaments he was always carried in his pouches, Slade did a little grease job on the driver and the outside guard. He examined the inside guard's bump and pronounced it nothing to give a thought to. "The station master will doubtless wish you to visit the doctor," Slade told them. "40 figure you'll make out okay, if you say it's so, Mr. Slade." "Reckon it is," said the driver, who knew him and the sheriff. "I see the stage horses have gotten over their scare and are nosing the grass," Slade said. "Rig up makeshift bridles and ride to town with us. The crew that will be sent to ride the coach and put it in shape will root out the outlaw horses, which I doubt ran far, get their rigs off and arrange to dispose of them. Imagine that poke you're packing contains money," he added to the inside guard. "Plenty," the guard admitted. "That's why us 2 fellers were sent along, and by so doing, advertising the fact the stage would be carrying money, would have been a nice haul, with 3 gentlemen who would certainly never appear as witnesses. Understand?" Their driver and the guards understood, and shivered. "Yes, us fellers owe you what money won't buy, Mr. Slade," the elderly driver said in a strained voice. "Here, you and the sheriff pack this infernal sack to town for us, please. I never want to see the blankety-blank thing again." Slade smiled and passed the poke to Crane, who tucked it under his arm and said, "And now for the diehard and a couple of snorts. I feel the need of them." Nobody objected to that, and they set out. "Yes, some of the carters will be glad to take a cart and fetch in the bodies," Slade said. Deputy Arbaugh volunteered to go along and guide them. When they reached the stage station, they learned that the station master had heard nothing of the change of schedule which came so near being disaster. Either somebody at the Richton station blundered, or it was part of the loco scheme to protect the money from robbers that somebody dreamed up. He said, "Yes, Sheriff, I'll take the money and lock it in the station safe, which is a good one. And I've arranged for a sleeping place for you boys," he added to the guards. "I think we'll toddle down to the diehard for a spell," one said. "I like it there, always lively." "Okay," nodded the master, "be seeing you." "Say," the sheriff said as they cared for their mounts, the stable-keeper taking over the chore of rubbing them down, "things were so hectic I forgot to ask, how did the devils make the lead stage horses fall like they did?" "An old trick," Slade replied. "If I'd gotten there when I planned to, I'd have spotted it." A rope stretched across the trail from one tree trunk to another. An old trick, but effective if handled right. Wouldn't have been effective if El Halcon had gotten there first. "Guess the change of schedule was the villain in the piece, eh?" "I'm inclined to agree," Slade answered. "Okay, now for the diehard. Reckon Esteban is already there." He faded out when the keeper started working on his Mustang. When they reached the diehard, they were greeted by cheers and hand-clapping, for the Richton guards were already there and spreading the story of the thwarted robbery. "All we got out of Esteban was assurance you were all okay," Mary told them. "We decided to wait and get Uncle Tom's version of what really happened." "No use asking Walt, he's as bad as Esteban," said the sheriff. "I crave snorts, and I think I can go for coffee and a snack," Slade chimed in. "And I, of course," said Mary, "while the cook gets busy. Uncle Tom, suppose you tell us just what happened out on the prairie and in the breaks." The sheriff obliged, and the story lost nothing so far as Slade was concerned. "So what really took place was bad enough," Mary said. "According to those two stage guards, a county was depopulated. Was quite a shindig." "All right," conceded the sheriff, "let us eat." They did, and the coffee and the snorts and a small glass of wine were not neglected. "And after you gentlemen finish your smokes, I want to dance," said Mary. "Plenty of time, it's not so terribly late, and for long I expect Arbaugh and his crew to roll in with the cartload of carcasses," said the sheriff. "Blount will be waiting at the office to line him up proper. I told him to strip off the masks they're wearing. Don't see masks much anymore. Guess the hellions figured they'd had to be different. Well, they all look alike now, after tangling with El Halcon." "That El Halcon business," complained Lemur, who had joined them. "Oh, I know it does a lot of good and comes in mighty handy at times. But just the same, it worries me." Walt gallivanting around everywhere, and getting into all sorts of ruckuses without Ranger prestige to back him up, owing to his habit of working alone whenever possible, and often not revealing his Ranger connections. Walt Slade had acquired a singular dual reputation. Those who knew the truth declared without reservation that he was not only the most fearless but also the ablest of the Rangers. Others who knew him as only El Halcon with killings to his credit, insisted just as vigorously that he himself was just an owl who too smart to get caught, so far, but would get his comeuppance sooner or later. However, among this latter group he had ardent supporters as well as detractors, who pointed out that he always worked on the side of law and order, and that sheriffs and other peace officers were only too glad to enlist his services when the going got rough, and that anybody he killed had a killing coming and overdue. The deception worried Captain McNulty, who was always afraid that this lieutenant and ace undercover man would come to harm at the hands of some mistaken law enforcement officer Slade would be loath to kill and would risk his own life trying not to do so, to say nothing of some professional lead pusher out to bolster his sinister reputation by downing the fastest and most accurate gunhound in the whole Southwest, and not above shooting in the back to achieve his ends. Although Captain Jim would be the first to admit that about all the gent in question would acquire would be a fatal dose of lead poisoning, so Captain Jim would grumble and fuss but wouldn't forbid the deception, When Slade would point out that as Halcon avenues of information were open to him that would be closed to a known ranger, and citing examples that outlaws sometimes thinking he was one of their own brand, would grow careless, to their grief, so Slade would go his carefree way as Halcon, satisfied with the present, giving to the future no thought at all, and treasuring most what was said by the pedants and other humble folk. Halcon, the good, the just, the compassionate, the friend of the lowly, and of all who know sorrow and tribulation, and oppression, may El Dios ever guard him. And Walt Slade believed, firmly, that such prayers from such sources would stand like tempered steel between the man and harm. Slate and Mary took to the floor. It was crowded but they made out very well. They had done several numbers and had returned to the table for a brief rest when Deputy Arbois entered, grinning, his force of body packers whooping behind him. All set, he announced. Look real nice on the floor that way. Yes, we removed the masks. Hard case-looking devils. A couple of barkeeps who dropped in for a look remembered serving some of them but didn't remember anything much about them. Maybe we'll have better luck after daylight when the night workers drop in. Probably, the sheriff conceded. Okay, sit down and have a drink with us. He had a couple with him, but the hour was late with even the carters showing signs of fatigue. They could sleep as late as they wished, and the notion of bed had its allure. With a last duty-bound whoop they began filing out. Raider, the owner, was looking at the clock. The sheriff joined him. Slade, Mary, and Lemur headed for the Tatter's quarters. It had been quite a night. 7 like everybody else. Slade slept quite late. It was close to mid-afternoon when he awoke. He shaved and bathed, ate the breakfast Lemur's old cook had ready for him. Mary had gone to the cart station to discuss the unloading that would take place early next day. After chatting with the cook for a while, he made his way to the sheriff's office. The office was cleared of the curious, the door locked, and they gave the bodies a once-over. Another bunch from the Panhandle or Oklahoma was Slade's verdict. All had once been cowhands, but 2 had been around oil fields quite a bit of late, and that means, prompted the sheriff, an interesting development that widens our field of operation, the ranger replied. The sheriff looked receptive, but Halcon changed the subject. There ensued a period of silence, each busy with his own thoughts. Abruptly Crane asked, "Any notion yet who is the headman?" "A very vague notion based largely on the process of elimination," Slade replied. "Here we go again," chuckled the sheriff. "When you start eliminating, it's just a matter of time." "Hope you're right," Slade smiled. "Was I ever wrong?" Crane asked. "Not often," Slade admitted. "Well, here comes Deputy Arbois, to superintend loading the bodies into a cart. Doc will hold an inquest in Sanderson. Guess we'd better mosey down to the cart station and see how Mary is making out." When they reached the station, they found a scene of hectic activity. "The boys want to finish the unloading today so we can roll to Sanderson early," Mary explained. "Are you and Uncle Tom riding with us, Walt?" "I rather think so, unless something happens to change our plans," Slade replied. "Will be wonderful," Mary said. "Hear that, boys?" The carters raised a cheer. The unloading was completed before dark, but the uproarious day and night before was taking toll. The carters were quite subdued and another early night was called. They rolled before mid-morning. The carters, after a good night's rest, were at fine fettle, in tune with the golden bronze of the day. The rippling grass heads were tipped with amethyst. Birds chirped in the thickets. Prairie dogs whistled. The carters mocked both. "It's just wonderful," Mary enthused. "A feast of beauty. Even the horses are affected. Listen to them snort." The brakes, that appeared so grim and forbidding a few nights before, looked benign, extending welcome arms out shadow to temper the heat. However, Slade had no intention of being deceived by appearances, and he and Estevan scouted the first of the 4 cautiously, noting every detail that might be of significance, including the actions of bird and beast. Notes of song abruptly change into irritated cries, a sudden taking to the wing for no apparent reason. An attack on the guarded trains seemed out of the question, but Saxon's plump money poke snugged under his arm would be a temptation, especially to any bunch that hadn't had much luck of late, and they had proven themselves very capable of unexpected moves. Witness, the try for the Richton stage. So Slade was determined to play it safe and overlook nothing that might provide the Hellions with opportunity. Into the shadows they went. The contrast was grateful after the heat of the sun, but they paid scant heed to personal comfort. their attention being focused on the winding trail and the bristling slopes on either side. Now the growth had developed a sinister look, and it seemed as Slade that the bird notes were muted. He was glad when they reached the far straggle of growth and were again on the sunny rangeland, and he experienced a sense of relief when the last cart rolled from the chaparral. "Everything's still lovely," Mary said as they reined in beside her. "And this is the way it's going to be all the way to Sanderson. Just you wait and sec." Slade hoped she was right. He and Esteban rode with the carts until the second stand of brakes were in view. Then they spurred ahead to do another chore of scouting. Slade didn't give the second much thought. With open prairie on all sides, there was no convenient getaway route, and one was imperative from the agriculture point of view. However, Slade took no undue chances and scouted the stand with care. The same applied, in a greater degree, to the third stand. And now as the dying sun shafts glinted on bit and bridle iron, and full dark was close, not far away loomed, gloomy and forbidding, the final test, the real test, the fourth stand of brakes. If anything was going to happen, there was where it would happen. Very simple, theoretically speaking. A quick grade on the foremost cart, kill Saxon, grab his money poke, hightail to not far away Sanderson and lose possible pursuit in the busy streets. So Slade translated the outlaw reactions for the benefit of the sheriff. "Yep, that's the way they'd do it," Crane agreed. "Only you and me and Esteban being here might tangle their twine a mite. That's what we're here for," Slade said cheerfully. "But in my opinion there'll be no raid tonight. Hunch tells me the next action we'll get mixed up in will be in Sanderson." "Good," replied the sheriff. "To Sanderson we go, in a hurry." I crave a snort. The hunch proved to be a straight one, so far as immediate action was predicted, for soon the lights of the railroad town glittered through the gloom, and shortly the train was rumbling through the streets to the station. The carts were lined for loading, the horses stabled, the outlaw bodies were placed in the sheriff's office. The sheriff hustled to his casa. Esteban sought the branding pen kitchen. The carters, their day's work finished, descended on the branding pen in search of nourishment, liquid and otherwise. Mary and Slade repaired to their rooms in the Regan house to freshen up a bit before eating. Another prosaic run from Echo to Sanderson completed, but Slade was soon to learn that this latest visit to the section was indeed a sequel to the one that preceded it. When Slade entered the branding pen, word of the frustrated Richton stage robbery had already reached Sanderson, but details were wanted. The carters supplied them, in a fashion that caused Hard Rock to post a guard at Slade's table to prevent him being bothered by questions while eating. Mary came bouncing in and they set to work on their belated dinner. The sheriff was inspired to order another snort. The carters were doing their best to keep the branding pen gay and noisy, and succeeding quite well. They were still in fine fettle, determined that the loading would be finished before dark the next day, and the train all set to roll for Echo the following morning. "Hello," Crane exclaimed. "There's Dane Bard again. Remember, he was dead Jason Birdnell's partner in a will they owned jointly. Seems to spend more time in Sanderson than in Echo, but, as you said, chances are there are some legal entanglements involved, Birdnell being murdered as he was. If Birdnell left any heirs, I haven't heard of them." Slade nodded, and studied Bard for some moments, Mary studying him. "And after you gentlemen finish your smokes, I think I've a dance coming." "More than one," she said. She had several, although the floor was crowded, the carters and their partners hilarious, before returning to the table with Slade for a sip of wine for her, a smoke for him. Then she and Saxon had a couple of numbers, while Slade and the sheriff discussed various matters, mostly dealing with possible outlaw activities. The jubilant carters were continuing their heck-raising, and everybody was having an enjoyable time, and meanwhile, the outlaws were not idle. The Stoddard General Store was one of Sanderson's biggest and best. It occupied a large building near the west edge of the town. The office was in the front and jutting out to the west side. Behind was the main store. The store did a lot of business with Mexican buyers south of the Rio Grande, shipping tools and machinery that were usually paid for in cash. The Stoddard store had other outlets, in New Mexico and Oklahoma in addition to various Texas communities. John Stoddard, the owner, enjoyed the reputation of being a tough customer to deal with, in any manner. The hour was getting quite late as Stoddard sat in the office counting and checking money, as was his habit. In the big general storeroom sounded the occasional mutters of low voices as his force of night workers, who also served as watchmen, sorted and arranged merchandise for the next day's business. Stoddard had extremely good hearing. He heard quite plainly the slight click that came from the front door of the office, which led to the outside. He was swinging around at his desk as the door slammed open and four masked men, guns in hands, rushed into the room. But John Stoddard was no pushover. He grabbed a gun from his desk drawer and was shooting almost as quickly as the four intruders. And as he reeled back with a cry of pain, blood pulsing from his creased scalp, his watchman loomed in the inner door, blazing away as fast as they could squeeze trigger. An outlaw fell to lie motionless. The watchman's guns boomed together, and that scorching volley brought down another. The remaining two whirled around at a word of command from one and dashed out the front door. The watchman bounded across the room after them, but hesitated an instant before charging blindly through the dark opening. From the outside came a beat of fast hoofs fading westward, and when the watchman and the bleeding, cursing Stoddard reached the outside, there was nothing to shoot at. Two of the devils, perhaps a third who held the waiting horses, had escaped. To hell with them. More urgent matters right here. One of the watchman clerks, an old-timer experienced in such matters, quickly patted and bandaged Stoddard's injury with clean towels. Another was sent speeding to summon the sheriff. "Try and get hold of that big Deputy Slade. He knows more than Crane," Stoddard told him. A second watchman was ordered to try and locate Doc Cooper. The fellow sent for the sheriff had a good notion as to where he would be found, wasted no time and headed for the branding pen with his account of the incident. "Okay, we'll go over there," Crane told him, and chuckled and shot Slade a glance which the ranger interpreted. "Yes, no doubt about it. This trip is a sequel to my previous one, all right," he said as he stood up. "Be seeing you soon, Mary. Don't see how we can get mixed up in anything this time. All the action taken care of already. Get set for another dance when I come back." 8. Reaching the store, Slade looked everything over with care. He agreed with the old-timer that Stoddard's injury was insignificant, explored the area with his sensitive fingers and found no indication of fracture, nor of concussion, for that matter. "Doc will change the pad and bandage and, the chances are, tell him to go get drunk. Mr. Stoddard," he added, "I see the key is in that outside door lock." "Is it always that way?" "Yes, guess that's right," the store owner replied. "I'm almost always last out, by the front door." Slade removed the key and examined it. "You have good hearing and doubtless good eyes, too," he said. "Okay, give this key a once-over. See the tiny scratches and abrasions on it?" From the outside, a pair of thin-jawed pliers are thrust into the keyhole. The key gripped and turned to shoot the bolt. That was the click you heard, the bolt being shot. "By gosh, you're right," Stoddard agreed. "Ever anything you don't see?" "Plenty." Slade smiled. "But this is obvious." To the eyes of El Halcon, the sheriff put in dryly. Doc Cooper arrived and agreed with Slade's diagnosis. He did change pad and bandage, and he did tell the store owner to go get drunk, and have that lock changed and a bar put across the door, Slade advised. Stoddard promised to do so. He shook hands with Slade and the sheriff and hoped to see them again soon, under pleasanter circumstances. Yes, he'd have the two bodies packed to the sheriff's office. The devils caught a tartar this time. Slade chuckled as they headed for the branding pen. Instead of the fat sheet they expected, they found they'd grabbed a grim old wolf by the cars. "Well, the incident tended to corroborate an opinion I've been forming. Yes, but the bunch never worked in Texas before. Otherwise they would have been more careful." Evidently they observed Stoddard counting money in his office, but failed to take into consideration those watchmen working in the main room. A bad mistake, a fatal one for two. "Nice floor decorations," Crane said cheerfully. "Well, here we are. Guess Mary will be surprised that we didn't get mixed up in anything. By the way, aren't you about ready to do a little name calling?" "Rather expect to tomorrow," Slade replied. Mary was surprised, and thankful. "I think we have time for one number, but that'll be all," she said. "The boys are quieting down rapidly." They had a number, a sip of wine for Mary, a final swig of coffee for Slade, a last snort for the sheriff, but it was indeed quite late after a long and hard day. They called it a night. Slade went walking late the following afternoon, for he wanted to think over what he had to tell the sheriff in the course of naming names. Gradually he worked his way the canyon mouth. He loved the view from the canyon mouth. Everywhere were the mountains fanging into the sky, soaring in somber grandeur, their towering crests bursts of flame, the tremendous ranges of the Big Bend and those of the Trans-Pecos, gleaming in the sunshine, lonely, austere, immutable. one with the eternities, counting time not in years, but in eons. The sky was a riot of color, from the blazing scarlet of the west to the soft rose of the east. Crimson and gold and pulsing vermilion vied one with the other to dominate the scene, while on the far horizon was the first faint shadow of the conquering night. With a last lingering glance at his beloved wastelands, he turned and walked slowly uptown. He paused at the cart station, where he found everything in fine shape. No doubt that the loading would be finished before dark and the carts ready to roll the following morning. "See you later, dear," Mary said. "Just a mite busy at the moment. Should keep you out of mischief," Slade approved. "You should talk about getting into mischief," she retorted. "Take care of yourself, dear." Next stop was the sheriff's office, where Crane was looking receptive. After coffee from the back room, he continued to look expectant. "Yes," Slade said, correctly interpreting the look, "I have a name for you. The name of a quiet, unobtrusive individual who owns half an oil well and hopes to finagle the other half along with several wells." It wasn't generally known that Jason Birdwell owned. The sheriff stared, started to speak, seemed to change his mind and did speak. "You mean Dane Bard?" "Yes," Slade replied. "I mean Dane Bard, as shrewd an outlaw chief as ever emigrated to Texas from the west or the north. I'm not exactly sure which. Doesn't mean much one way or the other, the unpleasant fact being that he is here." "How in blazes did you catch on to him?" Crane asked. "I never gave him a thought. Perhaps I should say first the tried and tested eliminative process, discarding one suspect after another, leaving only Bard, then to be considered, who would profit from Jason Birdwell's murder. More elimination. Appeared that Bard certainly would. So far, nobody else. Of course what started me thinking of him was a weakness that seems to afflict most owl hoots, and that is, the sheriff wanted to know, his keeping tabs on all my movements, as well as he could. Always, or nearly always, when an attempt was made on my life, just before or just after, chiefly just before, he was present, and I knew he was watching me." Mary noticed it and, "I'm pretty sure," Estevan, although he said nothing yet. "So there you are, cumulative evidence based on surmise and theory." "But I believe I'm right." "Certainly sounds that way," Crane conceded. "Yep, he's a hellion, all right, but what are we going to do about him?" "Your question," Slade smiled. "Try and find the answer." "Oh, you'll find it all right," declared the sheriff. "Just a matter of time. Let us drink." Slade glanced at the darkening window panes. "And I guess we'd better head for the cart station and the branding pen. The carters will have finished their loading and be all set to roll for Echo in the morning." "A notion," the sheriff agreed. "Doc Cooper finished up his inquest before noon, so that's out of the way." Locking the door, they set out. The racket in the branding pen assured them that the carters had finished their work. They continued to the station to find Mary and Saxon had just completed their final inspection and check and were also ready to call it a day. Mary scampered to her room in the Reagan house to freshen up a bit. "Be seeing you soon, dear," she called over her shoulder to Slade. He and the sheriff entered the branding pen and occupied their favorite table. The carters were in a happy mood, but more subdued than usual, anticipating an early start to Echo in their beloved Die Hard saloon, with plenty of spending money in their pockets. Mary arrived hungry. The kitchen force took care of that, in a highly satisfactory manner. Slade and the sheriff also ate heartily. "Maybe a long time between bites the way things happen here," said the latter. "Best not to take any chances," which, it was agreed, was good advice. After dinner, dancing was in order, so Mary steered Slade onto the floor, where they did several numbers together before he relinquished her to Saxon. So the evening passed away, without incident, fairly peaceful, not too noisy for once, and shortly after midnight found everybody asleep. 9 through a world all glorious with morning. The carts rolled for Echo. With them rode Slade, the sheriff and Estevan. Deputy Blount was left in charge of the Sanderson office. Deputy Arball was in Echo. The carters whooped and sang, the birds mocking them. A good trip was freely predicted. But just the same, El Halcon was taking no chances. Not with such an uncertain character as Dane Bard prowling the earth. He felt more confident than ever that he was marked for death, and that Dane Bard would pass up no opportunity to eradicate him. Well, that was a game two could play. Witness an abrupt demise of a number of the Bard ilk. He rode on, watchful and alert, but free from care. Estevan was also free from care as they scouted ahead. Free from care but hopeful. hopeful that his thirsty blade would drink deep. Ahead loomed the first of the 4 breaks, grim, ominous, sinister, dark, seeming, as always, to exude a nameless threat. Slade and Esteban rode the narrow trail between the bristles of growth that encroached on either side. Out of the bright morning, and a shadow enveloped them. Here the powers of darkness might indeed hold sway. Slade smiled at his own vivid imagination, but the feeling persisted. Even Shadow, his horse, seemed to be affected, for he snorted uneasily and pulled with a nervous foot through the first stand of breaks without incident. Again the bright sunshine, the grass heads rippling in the breeze like the waves of a restless sea. They pulled in and waited for the carts to catch up, rode with them for a while, talking with Mary and the sheriff. Then they raced ahead once more, soon leaving the carts far behind. Finally, ahead, again dark and ominous, loomed the second stand of breaks, and the feeling of danger approaching not only persisted but intensified. Imagination or no imagination, El Halcon was convinced that trouble lay in wait for them somewhere in the tangle of thorny growth. Generally, he was always inclined to write off the second stand as he did the first. With open prairie all around, there was no good getaway route for a band of raiders. For them, after they had consummated their evil purpose, sanctuary was in either Echo or Sanderson, and each was far away. Without doubt, the shrewd head of the bunch would have noticed that. Passing through the first ensconced stands, it appeared the convoy let down their guard somewhat, and he would take advantage of any opportunity that might accrue from that brief period of carelessness. What Slade hoped was that he would discount the eternal vigilance of El Halcon. He did. They reached the stand and were enveloped in shadows. Slade slowed the pace and rode peering and listening. OceanoffPDF.com has more than once in the past. It was his remarkable hearing that saved them from riding into the trap. It wasn't much, just a faint jingle of a bit iron as a horse tossed its head, but it was enough for El Halcon's ears. "They're here," he whispered to Esteban, "and not so very far ahead on the north side of the trail, where the growth is thickest. Get ready for business." Esteban caressed the haft of his knife and smiled. Again the tiny jingle. Slade nodded with satisfaction. He had made no mistake. A few more strides and he reined, sat listening again. For a third time the jingle, and it was stationary. He nodded again. "Here we leave the horses," he said, under his breath. "Then ease ahead slowly until we sight the devils. I think they are out on the trail." A cautious advance, little more than a crawl, and they saw the outlaws. 6 of them were tasked and mounted, sitting their horses at the north edge of the trail, gazing westward, all set to do murder when the cart scouts appeared around the shallow curve. "You know what to do," Slade breathed to Esteban. "Irido." Instantly the growth was fairly burst asunder by the screeching Yaqui Batliel. The terrified outlaw horses danced and snorted, out of control. The outlaws, with squawks of alarm, went for their holsters to shower lead at their attackers. Weaving, ducking, Slade drew and shot with both hands. The saddle was emptied. A hissing streak of light and Esteban's blade took care of another raider, 2 forms prone in the dust. Slade's .45s thundered again and the number down was 3. A voice blared a command. The remaining 3 dry gulchers jerked their maddened horses about and careened around the curve to the west. Slade started in pursuit, then hurled himself sideways and down in a blur of movement. The outlaw Esteban's blade down wasn't quite dead and, although blood gushed from the awful wound, was still shooting in every direction. Precious moments were lost dodging lead then as his gun dropped from a nerveless hand. Fast hoofs dimmed west. "Let them go," Slade said to Esteban. "They can hole up, wait for us and leave us at a disadvantage." He felt sure that on the open prairie Shadow could overtake them, but Esteban's Mustang would be unable to keep up with the Great Black, and odds of 3 to 1 would be a mite lopsided. The masks were stripped off to reveal the 3 dead outlaws as ordinary-appearing characters with nothing outstanding about them. Slade believed all had been cowhands, a long time back. Their horses had followed the other 3 and would soon be grazing on the good grass outside the breaks. They were good-looking critters and could fend for themselves until picked up. "Now we'll just take it easy and wait for the carts and the sheriff to show," Slade said. The sheriff, Mary with him, was first to arrive, which was as expected. "We heard the shooting, of course, sounding like it was quite a ways off," Crane said. "Then we saw 3 hellions bulge out of the breaks, going like the wind, and heading south by west. Figured you 2 would be mixed up in something, and that we'd better come and see. Let's have the lowdown." Slade obliged, stressing the part played by Esteban and his Yaqui yell. with odds of 6-2 against us, something drastic was needed to throw the devils off balance. So I whispered to Esteban to cut loose with a warble, Slade explained. He did, and the results were all that were to be desired. The sheriff laughed heartily. Heard it once, he said. Gave me the shivers. Where'd you learn it, Esteban? I was born in Sinaloa, the mountain state of the Mexico, Esteban replied. It is taught there. Taught, too, is the casting of the blade. From the looks of that carcass over there, you had a damn good teacher. Crane chuckled. The carts came rumbling around the bend, and more explanations were in order. And now, said Mary, let's get going, without any more stops between here and Echo. Although they certainly did not expect any more trouble, Slate and Esteban scouted the third and fourth stands of brakes, without incident, and with the sun still pretty well up in the sky, the train rolled to the station. A car bearing the three outlaw bodies swung out of line to dispose of their grisly cargo at the sheriff's office, Deputy Arbois being there to receive them, and relay alert and highly imaginative account of the stirring happenings in the brakes. The carts were set for unloading, the horses stabled. The well owners who were present in a body whooped as loudly as the carters who, with a fat bonus dangled before their eyes, went to work with a will and would keep it up for as long as the daylight would last. Lemur was already there, to give Saxon a hand, Mary being dispatched to her room in the oil magnate's quarters to freshen up a bit before taking over the chore of superintending the unloading. Slade also collected to freshen up a bit, after which he joined the sheriff and the diehard. He, too, was freshening up with a full glass of red dye. Figure one of the devils with got away was the head man, he asked. I'm inclined to think so, Slade replied. He was masked, same as the others, of course, but his build and carriage were what I associate with Dane Bard, and the way he reacted, instantly seizing opportunity, was distinctly Bard. We'll see, just a matter of time, said Crane. Waiter, for quite a while they sat sipping and smoking. At the nearby station the carters whooped and sang, the well owners and their workers joining in with a will. From the field came the rumble and thud of walking beam and drill, and the hiss and sputter of engines. A typical Echo evening, bustling, boisterous, and gay, but with the potentials of trouble always ready to hand. Mary came dancing in, sat down in a chair close to Slade's. Can just spare the time for a sandwich and a cup of coffee, she said. Then I'll relieve Uncle Westbrook. The boys are getting plenty done before dark. We'll finish the unloading by noon tomorrow, easily. Here comes Uncle Westbrook now. Just dropped in to say hello, Lerner said. Understand you had an interesting trip. Am I too interesting at times? Slade smiled. How are you, Westbrook? No complaint, the oil magnate replied. Mary, I'll see you at the station before dark, to give you a hand with the final tally, and have dinner with us, Slate invited. I'll do that, Lerner promised. He hurried out. Mary skipped out a few minutes later, and try to be here when I come back, she said to Slade and the sheriff. Seems to me you have had enough excitement to hold you for one day. Slade agreed with her, and was glad to just take it easy and relax. Besides, he was hungry. Nor was the sheriff in a mood for prowling around. Esteban was occupying his favorite place in the kitchen, where he could converse with his amigos. Tonight they for the Ladrone will watch, he told Slade. Perhaps 3 and they will see, and something see that Capitan will like to have seen. Having unscrambled that one, Slade was inclined to agree. He thanked Esteban and returned to the sheriff. Where do you suppose those devils aimed for when we saw them bulge out of the brakes and head southwest? Crane asked. Hard to tell, Slade answered. Perhaps they figured to hole up in the first stand of brakes out of Sanderson. Then again, seeing they were not being pursued, they may have kept right onto Sanderson where they figured they could get in the clear. Yes, hard to tell. Bart is something to figure. He sure is, growled the sheriff. A good example of how a Sidewinder don't have to be mean and tough and big to have everybody scared of him. Bard sure don't stand out in a crowd. No substitute for brains, and he's plentifully supplied, Slade replied. In appreciative silence they watched the marble of the sunset, and the window panes beginning to darken. The carters bellowed in and the diehard became decidedly more lively. Mary, Lerner, and Saxon followed them, riffling tally sheets, and demanding nourishment of various sorts. Raider hurried to the kitchen. In due time their dinner arrived and was thoroughly enjoyed. The sheriff sighed his appreciation and charged his pipe. Slade rolled a smoke. Mary sipped a glass of wine. Lerner and Saxon settled for snorts. Mary finished her wine and announced that she wished to dance. She had changed to the short, spangled skirt and the locket bodice of the dance floor, which, it was agreed, did not detract from her charms, so she and Slade had a couple of numbers together, after which Lerner and Saxon were favored. The sheriff consoled himself with a full glass. The old cook opened the kitchen door a crack, caught Slade's eye and shook his head. Evidently Esteban had nothing to report so far. Slade and Mary took to the floor again. But it had been a long day and a hard one, with more work in the offing. Soon everybody called it a night, the Carters storing up energy against the bonus celebration of the morrow, which promised to be a wild one. Slade and the sheriff hoped it might provide them with opportunity of some sort. Ten and Esteban's amigos saw nothing of their ladrone last night. The sheriff remarked when he and Slade got together a couple of hours before noon. That's right, Slade replied. Now I'm of the opinion that after the devils left the brakes and saw they were not pursued, they kept right on. Going to Sanderson, perhaps to hole up there until dark, but we'll hear from them soon enough, of that you can rest assured. No doubt about it, if they run true to form, Crane growled, and likely we won't like the hearing, if they again run true to form, which the chances are they will. You're getting as hard to unscramble as Esteban. Slade smiled, but I think I understand what you mean. How about some coffee? Coming up from the back room, said Deputy Arbaugh, who entered at that moment. The boys will have their unloading chore finish in another hour or so and be all set for some fun. Their notions of fun usually mean headaches for others, snorted the sheriff. They can make more racket than a tray full of blue jays at sunrise. Oh, well, they'll only be young once. Let 'em have their fun. The coffee was forthcoming and they drank it. The sheriff spiked his from his bottle. Slade and Arbaugh took theirs straight. Well, said Slade, shoving his empty cup aside, guess TD better mosey down to the station and see how Mary is making out with her final checklists. You say Lemur is there? Yes, lending a hand, Arbaugh replied. He's always doing that for somebody, in one way or another, remarked Crane. Let's go, Walt. Leaving Arbaugh in charge, they set out. Again the weather was cooperating, a balmy day of sunshine, which the sheriff declared was a good omen. Reaching the station, they found Mary as chipper as the Carters, which was plenty, and they found the well owners highly elated. Some much-wanted machinery from the east had, they thought, reached Sanderson. Too late for the cart train to transport it to Echo. Mary, by an outstanding effort, had speeded up the delivery and included it in the present shipment, and although they don't know it yet, will mean more bonus money. Yes, it's going to be a wild night. Well, they'll have tomorrow off to recuperate. They're getting smart, too. They plan to eat, and visit around, and not really let themselves go until it gets dark. They've learned that they can drink more and better after laying a foundation of food and relaxation. Taking a page out of Walt's and Uncle Tom's book, I fear their choice of preceptors is not too wise, Slade replied smilingly. Whatever that means, sighed the sheriff. Can you drink it? Which brought forth a general laugh. And now I'm going to my room for a while, Mary said. Be seeing you both after a while. Try and be here when I get back. Don't go gallivanting off somewhere. She and Lerner headed uptown, still scanning tally and check sheets. And now, said Crane, I reckon it's up to us to just wait and sit tight until we see which way the cat jumps. About the size of it, Slade conceded. But I am experiencing a strong premonition that something is going to cut loose in Echo before the night is over. Another hunch in the works, chortled the sheriff, but a very vague one, Slade answered. Had any breakfast? Nope, I wanted to get to the office first, to see if you might have something on tap. Same applied to me, Slade replied. So I guess we might as well give the diehard some business. Reaching the diehard, they sat down and gave their orders. The Carters were also eating and were amazingly quiet, for the Carters, but Slade knew it was the calm before the storm. He and Crane ate leisurely breakfasts, pausing between courses to smoke and talk, for the cook appeared trying to outdo himself with El Halcon to serve and decorate the plates more than once. Finally, Slade turned and gazed out the window at the tremulous sunglow, shook his head. Tom, it's too damn nice out to be cooped up in here. Suppose we ride through the North Cut and look the assembly yard over again. That's a notion, applauded Crane. Was just beginning to think that way myself. I'll down this last snort and we'll mosey. Waving so long to Raber and the others, they departed, walked to the stable and cinched up. Being in no hurry, They let the horses choose their own gait, and some little time passed before they reached the yard, which was its usual hive of industry. Leaving the horses in the stable, order of inspection followed. Slade, offering certain suggestions the construction engineer in charge welcomed. The great rotary pump drill that was tapping the large and deep-seated oil pool under Mary Merrill's rangeland also came in for a once-over. Everything satisfactory. With the afternoon well along, they headed back to town. On the way, they passed the big 49er saloon that was located close to the south mouth of the railroad cut through the north slope and not far from the edge of the oil field. It was patronized largely by young railroaders and oil field workers, a boisterous and rowdy bunch. Potential heck-raisers, according to the sheriff, and was doing a booming business. Understand it's for sale, he remarked. Luke Boone, the owner, wants to move to Sanderson and open up a place there. Rumhole owners are just like a chuck line riding cowhands. Got to always be on the move. Slade nodded and they rode on. Reaching the stable, they cared for their horses, the stable-keeper lending a hand, and paused at the office for a smoke and a few words with Deputy Arbois, which extended to quite a chat, after which, with sunset not far off, they continued to the Die Hard, where the carters were perking up considerably. First, they visited the unloading for a final inspection. The well owners in their hands were packing off the last of the materials from the carts. Saxon completing his count, he told them that Mary, spending the most of the afternoon at the station, had returned to her room for a while. He folded and stowed his sheets and accompanied them to the Die Hard, where things were already getting quite lively. Yep, a wild one, repeated the sheriff. How are the hunches coming along, Walt? Still insisting there'll be activity hereabouts before the night is over, Slade replied smilingly. The sheriff gave a dismal groan but did not look exactly displeased, nor did Esteban when Slade contacted him in the kitchen a little later. Well, if something doesn't cut loose in here before the night's over, I'll be much mistaken, said the sheriff, getting wilder by the minute. I predict that nothing worse than noise and horseplay will occur in here, Slade answered. It isn't a quarrelsome bunch, the sheriff chuckled, in line with Esteban. If Capitan so says, then so is so, he somewhat misquoted. Saxon joined them and they had a couple of drinks together. Coffee for Slade. Yes, the boys are quite chipper tonight, Saxon said. No work tomorrow, and unexpected bonus money in their pockets. They're raring to go. Mary arrived, sparkle-eyed and rosy-cheeked, declaring she was hungry. So was everybody else, so at once the cook got busy. Hunger is a fine sauce, and the cook's offerings were received with enthusiasm, doubtless inspired. He had made preparations for seconds and his sound judgment was acclaimed by empty plates. After snorts, coffee, wine and smokes, dancing was in order. The floor was crowded but Slade and Mary did very well, although according to the sheriff, it was more a wrestling match than a dance. But the carters didn't mind, and partners held each other closer, to which nobody voiced objection. Slade was comfortable and relaxed despite the persistent presence of the premonition of evil building up. Okay, let it build. He'd take care of it when it showed its head. He joined in the conversation going on between Mary and the others, but he was growing restless. He accused himself of looking for an excuse to get mixed up in something, but as a matter of fact, the room was hot and smoky, and steadily getting more so. A breath of fresh air would go good, and it was not late. Plenty of time to mosey around for a short period without marring the festivities. Mary and Saxon were dancing, the sheriff and Lerner talking with acquaintances at the bar, so why not? He eased from his chair and slipped through the swinging doors. The streets were crowded and noisy, but the air was clean and fresh, and there was no smoke. Thoroughly enjoying himself, he sauntered south, slowly. He glanced through several windows into places that were doing a good business. For a while he stood gazing toward the field, with its forest of derricks rising like pointing fingers into the sky. Plenty of noise and lights there. He hankered for neither and walked on, veering slightly to the west. He passed the mouth of the railroad cut and continued until he reached where the old trail wound down the slope. The old trail was still ridden some by people who liked the ride or because the cut was blocked for a while by switching freight cars. He gazed up the trail to the lofty crest of the bowl. Would be nice up there, cool and dark under the stars, with the bristles of chaparral nudging the track on either side. Well again, why not? His companions were busy and he wouldn't be missed for a while. Chuckling to himself for his excuse-making, he began mounting the trail. He walked slowly, for the ascent was rather steep. Overhead the stars glittered, and in the pale starshine the clumps of chaparral stood out dark and blocky, but individual, at least to the eyes of El Halcon. Without incident, he reached the crest, strolled across, heading south. He was perhaps halfway across the crest, at a point where the trail curved, when he halted, head up in an attitude of listening. Somebody else was using the old trail tonight. No doubt about it. From the south came a click of horses' irons. Being in no mood to answer questions and put up with chatter, he eased back into the growth and out of sight until the horsemen should have passed. They passed, all right, but only a few paces beyond where El Halcon was hidden. They halted their mounts, turned them to face south, back the way they came, and waited for somebody or something. Slade was intrigued. Something strange about that maneuver. He eased ahead a couple of yards, and heard something else, the grind of iron tires on the hard surface of the trail. The horsemen also heard it, for they tensed in their hulls, their faces wide as shutters under low-drawn hat brims. There were 5 of them. Around the bend in the trail rolled a light wagon, 2 men in the driver's seat, and El Halcon understood. An instant before the 5 outlaws jerked their guns to start shooting at the wagon. His great voice thundered, "Up, you are under arrest." That thundering voice undoubtedly saved the 2 men in the wagon. The outlaws, startled, thrown off balance, fired wildly, and missed. They whirled toward Slade, shooting as fast as they could squeeze trigger, but without aim. Both Slade's big .45s cut loose with a crashing roar, and a hair-raising gun battle was in progress on the narrow trail. With the odds heavily against the Ranger, but the 2 men on the wagon seat were no easy marks. They too were shooting, and they were not mounted on terrified horses, as were the Drigglechers. An outlaw fell, to lie motionless. Both Slade's Colts boomed, and there were 2 down. Guns blazed in every direction, and there was another empty saddle. The remaining 2 devils managed to spin their maddened horses around, and went streaking back the way they came. Slade doubted they'd stop before reaching the south foot of the trail. An astounded bellow came from the wagon. "11, it's Mr. Slade." "Should have knowed it," bawled another voice. "Always right on hand where he's needed most." "Much obliged, Mr. Slade." "Much obliged. Hold everything. I got a lantern under the seat. I'll light up and we'll see what's what." A match was struck. The lantern lighted. Slade at once recognized one of the speakers as Luke Bullen, the owner of the 49er saloon. Bullen reached under the seat again, drew forth the husky money poke. "Sold my saloon, the 49er, he explained. "This is the money to pay for it. The loss would have hit me mighty hard. I've a prime notion that after those hellions got through with us, the money wouldn't have mattered much," said the other, Bullen's head bartender. "Much obliged again, Mr. Slade, for keeping us from getting our comeuppance." Slade changed the subject. "How come you were riding the old trail instead of the railroad cut?" he asked. "We'd heard about things that happened in the cut and figured we'd be safer on the trail," Bullen replied. "Guess we were mistaken, Mr. Slade." "Looks a little that way," Slade replied dryly. "Now if you gentlemen WDLL lend a hand, we'll load those 3 bodies into your wagon and pack them to the sheriff's office." "You're darn right we will," said Bullen. Hopping down from the seat, the bodies were quickly loaded. "Mean-looking devils," Bullen thought. Slade reserved comment until he had a better look at them in a better light. The outlaw horses hadn't run far and were nosing the grass. Slade approached them without difficulty, loosened the cinches and flipped out the bits, so they could graze in comfort. They were good-looking animals and would be picked up shortly. Slade joined Bullen and the bartender in the wagon which rolled across the crest and down the slope. "Wonder how those devils figured we were going to ride the trail instead of through the cut," Bullen remarked. "Was supposed to be a secret. The explanation is quite simple," Slade answered. "It was generally known that you were endeavoring to sell your saloon and move to Sanderson. They had been keeping tabs on your movements, and when you finally closed a deal in Sanderson and received the purchase money and were heading home with it, they evidently planned to make a try for it, and when you took to the trail, they saw opportunity and tried to cash in on it. And were it not for you, they would have cashed in on it." Bullen sighed. "And how in blazes, Mr. Slade, did you happen to be right on tap at the right time and place like you were?" "Was the purest fluke of chance," the ranger replied. "I was just taking a walk in the cool night air, when I heard the horses coming from the south. I didn't think anything of it, but not wanting to be bothered by chatter, I eased into the growth until they were past. After that everything was obvious." "Well, thank heaven you decided to take a stroll when you did," Bullen said fervently. clutching his money poke. And by the way, Slate added, I think it would be a good idea to hand the money to this raider and have him lock it in his diehard safe, where it will be safe until you pick it up tomorrow. A notion. All right, Bolton agreed. We'll do just that, Mr. Slade. With no further difficulty, the wagon reached the base of the slope. It rolled on and came to a stop in front of the diehard, where the carters were really raising the roof. Slate entered the saloon and was met by a volley of questions from Mary and the sheriff. We'll tell you more about it a little later, he promised Mary. Right now, Tom, we have some floor decorations to dispose of. Arba at the office? Right. Come along, Tom. I really will be back in a few minutes, or something like that. He and Crane hurried out, the sheriff mumbling cuss words under his mustache. Bolton had been talking with some of the carters and a cheer was raised when Slade appeared. He waved in answer and the wagon rolled on to the sheriff's office, where Deputy Arba took charge of the bodies, having them laid on the floor. They had gathered something of a following and Crane allowed them to look the bodies over for a few minutes and express opinions, which were not laudatory to the slain outlaws. He told them to return later for a more thorough examination. Two had been cowhands in the past, Slade said. The other had worked some around the oil fields. They left Arba in charge, free to exercise his own judgment as he saw fit. Bolton again took over the wagon, which was disposed of, the horses stabled. The bartender hurried to the 49er to see what was conditions there. He'd join them later. Slade, with Bolton and the sheriff, returned to the diehard. Bolton at once contacted Raider, who accepted a sack of money and locked it in his safe. Bolton settled at a table with something to eat. And now let's have it, all of it, Mary said. Slade obliged to the best of his ability, stressing the fluke of chance angle, which did not appear to impress his hearers. Always he manages to duck the credit to him, said Lemur. Oh, well, he's made that way and there's nothing to do about it. See, the boys are really getting lively, Slade remarked. Yes, with no work tomorrow and bonus money in their pockets. They're having quite a time, said Mary. Well, they have earned it. Nobody could ask for better and more loyal workers, like begets like, Slade said. They know they have a boss who is loyal to them and will stick with them through thick or thin. Right, nodded the sheriff. And talking about getting thin, I figure that Bolton over there at his table is setting a good example by eating everything in sight. Waiter, the waiter cooperated, and so did the cook and his boys. As a result, the companions stowed away a dinner par excellence that actually distracted their attention from the antics at the bar and on the dank door. For now the carters and their girls were really letting themselves go, with no holds barred. Crane finally looked in their direction and chuckled. Slade smiled. Mary shook her shining curls in mock disapproval. Sometimes I think I'd like to be a dance floor girl, she said. Carefree, no inhibitions. Take what today has to offer and don't worry about tomorrow. Sounds good, Lemur conceded. What do you think, Walt? Oh, he's the male version. Mary broke in, always on the go, never giving any thought to what might happen, which evoked a general laugh. They had finished eating and the sheriff was charging his pipe when Dane Bard entered. Glancing neither to left or right, he got a place at the bar in order to drink. Hellion don't look happy, muttered Crane. Guess he has reason not to look happy, Lemur said, his voice little above a whisper, losing out on what would have been a really outstanding haul. You figure he was one of the Drigglechers, don't you, Walt? One of the two that escaped. I feel safe in saying, Slade replied, but I couldn't swear to it, getting only a glimpse of his face under his low-drawn hat brim and through the powder fog. His time's coming, grunted the sheriff. Yep, just a matter of time, and I figure time's running short for the devil. Slade hoped he was right. He too was fed up with Dane Bard and his deviltry. Bard did not stay long. He managed to get another drink, which he downed at a gulp and walked out, still glancing neither to left or right, but Shade was sure he saw eyes glint in his direction. Crane frowned at the doors, a speculative gleam in his frosty old eyes. And now, I wonder what the hellion is up to, he said. Don't bother your head too much about it, Slate advised. Chances are we'll learn fast and not like the learning, snorted the sheriff. The attitude did not impress, for everybody present knew that Sheriff Tom Crane actually liked trouble and excitement. If he didn't, he'd never have taken up with Walt, Mary declared with conviction. I want to dance. They did, and enjoyed several numbers, for now the crowd was thinning and there was a chance to really step out a bit. "And I figure it's about time for me to go in for a little ear pounding," said Lerner. "Work to do today, and I see both Raider and Saxon are looking at the clock." "Okay, be seeing you this afternoon." Mary gave Saxon a nod and he herded his charges out, still dutifully kicking up a little row. Raider sounded his last call. Slade and Mary waved goodnight to everybody and sauntered out, Esteban drifting along behind. 12 The diehard and similar places were unusually quiet the following afternoon. The Carters were still busy getting over the results of their grand bust the night before, but they'll liven up after a bit, the sheriff said as he and Slade sat in the office discussing matters. Not like last night, though, knowing they have to roll the empties to Sanderson tomorrow. The blanket-wrapped bodies of the slain outlaws had been loaded into a cart for dispatch to Sanderson and the office floor was bare, the sheriff regarding it with disapproval. "Won't be for long," he predicted hopefully, "with Dane Bard running loose." "I fear you are right," Slade replied. "Can depend on him kicking up a ruckus. A very obliging gentleman, who hasn't had too much luck with his ruckuses of late," Crane pointed out. "Figure to ride with the train tomorrow." "I rather think I will," Slade answered. "That is if nothing happens to cause me to change my plans. As I've said before, it seems that all I do of late is ride herd on cart trains, but it also seems that most of the off-color happenings of late have, in one way or another, centered around the trains, and I have a feeling that the next excitement will take place in Sanderson." "Another hunch, eh?" chuckled the sheriff. "Well, I sure go for those hunches. More power to them." "I see action, but don't forget," Slade added smilingly, "that sometimes one hunch overrides another, and we might see action right here in Echo." "You get me all mixed up," lamented the sheriff. Slade laughed. "And I think we'd both be better off for something to eat," he said. "And a couple of snorts," said Crane. "And if Mary is around, I'll bet a hatful she's hungry." "She and Lerner will be there after a while, hoping for a peaceful night," Slade replied. "If my hunch about Sanderson continues to stand up, perhaps they won't be disappointed." The sheriff stood up. "Let's go," he said. "Arbois will be here soon to take over the office." He locked the door and they walked through the crowded streets to the diehard. Despite the early hour, the diehard was already doing plenty of business, and the Carters were perking up. They raised a cheer at Slade's entrance. "Mary and Lerner will be here after a bit," Saxon told them. They sat down at their table to wait. Saxon and the sheriff fortified themselves with snorts. Slade indulged in coffee. Mary arrived first. "Uncle Westbrook is still working in his office," she said. "I'm fine," she replied to Slade's query. "I'll be getting hungry soon, though, if you don't mind, we'll wait for Uncle Westbrook. He'd like to have dinner with us." "Sure, we'll wait," Slade agreed. "Be glad to have him. He's good company." "By the way, has anybody seen Esteban?" There was a general shaking of heads. "Out scouting around, the chances are, trying to tie on to something that will please Capitan," the sheriff said. "That Esteban," sighed Mary. "He's wonderful, but he can root out more trouble. Comes in handy every now and then, though," Crane added. "Yes, he does," Mary conceded. "But he's bad as Walt when it comes to getting mixed up in something." With the shadows growing long, Lerner finally arrived. Word was at once sent to the kitchen. The cook and his boys got busy. After dinner, a period of peaceful relaxation, mostly in the silence of full-fed comfort. Then Mary wishing to dance. The Carter is growing quite lively but with one eye on the clock. All in all, a typical night after a bonus bus night in the diehard. Slade and Mary hoped it would stay that way, for there was a hard day coming up the morrow, and no telling what problems would have to be solved. "And we'll just end it on a nice note," Mary said after a while. "Come on, Walt." She seized him by the hand and led him across the floor to the little raised platform that accommodated the musicians, where the orchestra leader was already waving a guitar. The Carters, knowing what to expect, let loose a joyous whoop. The orchestra leader stepped forward and handed the guitar to Slade. "Senoritas and senores," he shouted. "Attention, please, and silence. Great honor is done us. El Halcon will sing." The guitar boomed great chords under a master's touch as Slade sauntered to the edge of the platform and flashed his white smile at his expectant audience. He glanced around, threw back his black head and sang. A great poet once said that music is the universal language, and truly when interpreted by such a voice as Walt Slade's great golden baritone bass, it sets at naught barriers of race or creed. and as that mighty voice pealed and thundered through the room, it was small wonder that men and women stood entranced and silent, as if in the presence of a marvel, which indeed they were, and Walt Slade had the power, attribute of the true artist, to reunite his audience in what would most greatly appeal. So he chose to sing simple, homely songs dealing with the things his hearers knew and understood, and appreciated. For the vaqueros, he sang in Spanish of the beauty and romance of Mexico, where men dream dreams they know never can be more than dreams, but nevertheless, they dream. The listening cowhands saw the lonely campfire under the stars, the danger and toil of the day forgotten, music and laughter, jest and repartee, and awesome lies, but all in good fellowship. They saw, too, the tramping herds that would feed the hungry cities, and too, the blue mystery of the storm and the red terror of the stampede. To the farmer's eyes what fear recalled his amber fields of grain and his lit-hung boughs of luscious fruit, which also go to stay the famine of the multitudes, too few of whom had ever seen the glowing beauty of the rangeland and the gold of the sun, its purple wonder and the silver of the moon. And so the oil well workers, of whom there were many present, would not feel neglected. He put forth that wonderful voice in a simulacrum of the mighty dance of the ponderous walking beams, the crashing of the drills, and the hiss of the black gold rising from the abysmal depths of the earth. He flashed a teasing grin at the clumped-together carters, and amid roars of laughter, his audience heard the bawling voices telling the cart horses their opinion of their worthlessness, and the snorted and whinnied replies, and the railroaders heard the clanking siderids, and the booming exhaust shattering the silence of the night. And for the dance floor were girls, and Mary, a wistful but beautiful love song of his own composition, a last breath of exquisite melody, a crash of chords, and Slade bowed to his audience and walked slowly back to his table amid building shaking applause. The singingest man in the whole Southwest, Mary murmured, and with the fastest gun hand, chuckled the sheriff, returning the guitar from Slade's hand to its owner. Estevan looked in from the kitchen, shook his head. Nothing to report. And this, said Mary, should be the end of a perfect day. She smiled at the sheriff and Slade, waved cordially to the expectant carters, and gave Saxon a nod. Around late morning the long train of empties rolled for Sanderson. After a good night's rest, everybody was feeling fine. The cart was raring to go. With the train rode Slade, Estevan, and the sheriff. Well, is the hunch still pointing toward Sanderson? Crane asked. Definitely so, the ranger replied. Insists we'll see action in Sanderson. Not that we're taking any chances between here and Sanderson, with Saxon packing that hefty money poke, a temptation to any owl who, much less such a voracious character as Ain Bard. They rolled through the shadowy railroad cut and out onto the sunny prairie. Mary drew a deep breath. As beautiful as always, she said, and reined a little closer to Shadow. Be seeing you the other side of the break, Slade told her a little later. He and Estevan scouted ahead, watchful, alert as they entered the gloom of the first of the 4 stands of breaks. Slade slowed the pace several times to almost a halt as they appeared and listened. It took very little to give warning to the eyes and ears of El Halcon, and Estevan was almost as adept, almost, but not quite. The birds and the beasts are Capitan's friends, Estevan remarked. Does danger threaten, they will him warn. They've certainly done it in the past, Slade conceded. Well, through the first stand, with nothing untoward happening. We'll wait here until the carts catch up, then we take on number 2. The second stand was also negotiated without a hitch. Again they waited at the far edge for the carts to join them. Everything just perfect, Mary enthused. A nice, peaceful trip with no trouble. You'll bet on it. Don't bet into much of a hurry, warned the sheriff. We've still 2 of these blankety-blank things to crawl through, and it'll be dark before we've gotten all the way through. You're always a pessimist, Uncle Tom, a bird of ill omen. We're going to make it with no trouble. The sheriff snorted, but didn't argue further. What do you think, Walt? Mary asked. That it has certainly been a beautiful day, was the evasive reply. Mary shot him a quick glance through her black lashes, but refrained from continuing the discussion. Slade himself knew he would be pleased when that ominous bristle, already darkening more and more with sunset beginning, would be behind them and the route to Sanderson clear. More than once there had been trouble in the 4th stand, for it was ideal for dredging operations with frequent sharp bends in the narrow trail, with the tall and heavy chaparral growth encroaching on either side. Several times the cart trains had been attacked, but due to the wise foresight of El Halcon, all the raiders got for their pains were candidates for Sanderson's fast-growing boot hill, with the carters suffering no losses, but Slade feared that if the raids continued, the law of averages might catch up with the outfit and there would be some honest worker killed, which he earnestly hoped to prevent. So as he and Esteban approached the fourth breaks, even his habitual watchfulness was intensified. Outside the west straggle of the third stand, they had picked up the sheriff against the chance he might be needed. With anxious eyes, Mary watched them ride west into the shadows, for it was now almost full dark and the fourth stand was but a misty cloud against the fast-fading prairie grasses. If Danebard does try to pull a raid, you may be sure that it will be something original and unexpected, Slade told his companions. He's remarkably adept at that sort of thing, as he's proven several times, but he ain't had much luck when he's gone up against El Halcon, the sheriff remarked dryly. Came pretty close to putting it over a couple of times, Slade replied, but pretty close ain't good enough, the sheriff countered. My money's still on El Halcon. Slade laughed and let it go at that. They rode on at a steady but not too bad pace, Slade's eyes constantly focused on the misty shadow that drew nearer and nearer, and seeming to become more ominous with every stride the horses took. 13 But, which is often the case after an expectant period of tension and emotions, nothing happened and the carts rolled out of the final straggle onto the open prairie, and in the distance glittered the lights of Sanderson. Another half hour and the clumsy vehicles were rumbling along Sanderson streets. The bodies of the slain Alhoots were placed in the sheriff's office, Deputy Blount there to receive them. The carts were set for loading, the horses stabled. Mary and Slade repaired to their rooms in the Reagan house to clean up a bit. The sheriff hastened to his casa to make sure nothing had gone wrong there during his absence. The carters stormed into the branding pen. Esteban took up his usual post in the branding pen kitchen. Business picked up. What did I tell you? Mary said to Slade when she joined him at their table. A nice peaceful trip with no trouble. You won your bet, Slade conceded. He refrained from mentioning that his hunch was still pointing straight to Sanderson. And Arlings, hold your arms ready to catch me when I topple over from hunger, Mary said. I don't know how long, but if the cook doesn't get busy, it sure won't be long. Slade waved to Hard Rock Hogan, the owner, who at once made for the kitchen. Saxon, everything under control, came in with his hands full of tally sheets for the next day's loading and joined them, stowing the sheets in his pockets. The sheriff appeared a few minutes later, a waiter who must have been inspired close behind him, with a full glass of the branding pen's most potent red dye. Dinner was a gala affair, everybody happy because of the peaceful run of the empties from Echo. The carters had been told to sleep as long as they wished, there being plenty of time to take care of the loading, and had the carts ready to roll the following morning. Mary had as many dances as she wanted. Between numbers, Slade and the sheriff smoked and talked. But Slade was growing restless. There was no indication of trouble building up, although his hunch relative to trouble in Sanderson persisted, even grew stronger. There was no getting away from the fact that he craved action. He stood it as long as he could. There was certainly no untoward action in the branding pen. Mary and Saxon were on the dance floor. The sheriff was talking at the bar. There were no signs of Esteban. With a final glance around, he rose to his feet and slipped through the swinging doors. The street was crowded, but the air was cool and bracing, and there was an agreeable lack of smoke. He strolled aimlessly, keeping a sharp eye on his surroundings, glanced into a number of places, all of which were doing business, but did not enter. Visiting the railroad yards briefly, he chatted with the night yard master, then moseyed south, with nothing untoward taking place. Began to look like the hunch was a bit off the beam, although it still persisted, strong as ever. He reached the canyon mouth and stood and gazed. Quiet here, and deserted. The mountains loomed ghost-like against the sky. After a while, he turned and walked slowly back to the branding pen. Mary and Saxon were still on the floor, the sheriff at the bar. Slade sat down and began manufacturing a smoke, glancing at the black square of an open window on the far side of the room. Slade never sat directly in line with the window or door if possible not to do so, but he liked to have them within the range of his vision. He saw the gun thrust through the open window a split second before it blazed. The report boomed like thunder, and a man sitting with his back to the window fell sideways to the floor. Walt Slade went across the room at a dead run, dodging and slithering, and through the window feet first, landing in the alley back of the saloon, keeping his balance by a miracle of agility. Just as he whipped out both Colts, he saw a horseman careen from the far mouth of the alley. He sent a stream of lead in that direction with little hope of scoring a hit. The beat of hoofs continued. After a moment of dead silence, the branding pen was a madhouse for fare. Slade sent his voice rolling through the tumult. Through the kitchen, fetch a lantern. Even as he spoke, the kitchen door banged open and Esteban streaked out, swinging his long blade in throwing position. After him came the old cook, bearing a lamp. Close behind him were the sheriff, Mary, and Saxon. A number of carters boiled out. Slade motioned them back, took the lamp and examined the ground under the window. Killer wore Rangeland boots, he said. All right, back inside. Nothing more we can do out here. Yes, he got away, through the far end of the alley. Back in the saloon, Slade at once approached the body of the unfortunate victim of the attack. The murderer's bullet had struck him in the back of the head, killing him instantly. Appeared to be a man approaching middle age. His dark hair was grizzled at the temples. He wore what the Rangeland called store clothes, well-fitting corduroys. Pack him to the sheriff's office so we can give him a more careful going over, Slade directed. Deputy Blount will be there to receive him. Tell Blount to keep everybody out until we get there. With which he and the sheriff and Mary led the way back to their table. Yes, I'll have some coffee and a smoke, Slade said. Guess Tom can stand a snort, and Mary some wine. And here comes Saxon to join us, after quieting his boys. Well, Mary, looks like your nice peaceful day ended up in a blaze of glory, but we really didn't get mixed up in it, the girl pointed out. Walt trying to catch the killer was just the thing he'd be expected to do, as a ranger. Guess you've got something there, Slade admitted, said the sheriff. Let us drink. A little later he and Slade repaired to the office to give the murder victim a careful examination. Go ahead to the branding pen and have some drinks, Slade told the deputy. We'll lock up. With the door locked and the blinds drawn, Slade and the sheriff examined the body with scanned results. Pockets divulged considerable money, but nothing else of particular interest, or so it seemed. Been around the oil fields quite a bit. Lint in the pocket seems blackened with grease, the ranger remarked. Hello, what's this? From an overlooked inside pocket he drew forth a torn and crumpled envelope. He gazed at what was written on it and passed it to the sheriff, who stared at the neat lettering and whistled under his mustache. He read, Kenneth Birdnell, and what the blazes does that mean? He demanded. It means, for one thing, that murdered Jason Birdnell left an heir, possibly more than one, El Halcon replied. And the heir, Kenneth Birdnell, was murdered so he wouldn't be around to put in a claim against those wells, eh? The sheriff guessed. So I would presume, Slade answered. Only I fear it would be impossible to prove it. All I saw of him was his hand shoving the gun in the window, and when I managed to dodge my way to the outside, he had forked the horse he had waiting and hightailed. Wonder what was the relationship between the two Birdnells, remarked Crane. Brothers, perhaps, Slade replied, or possibly uncle and nephew. They look to be about the same age, but be that as it may, I feel we are closing in on the devil. He seems to be continually tying on to what will be a problem for him, and a man can stand just so much of that until it causes him to make a blunder that will be his undoing. The sheriff repeated his favorite remark, just a matter of time, just a matter of time. Yes, Slade replied, but it's not nice to have such a killer bunch running loose. The death of Kenneth Birdnell might well have been the death of an innocent man. Well, I guess we'd better be getting back to the branding pen, before Mary comes looking for us. As was to be expected, when they reached the branding pen they were bombarded with questions, which Slade answered evasively. We'll pack him to Echo with us, and perhaps the coroner may be able to learn something about him. During the loading, folks can look the body over and maybe somebody will recall something relative to him. Mary and Saxon were of course given the real lowdown, as was Esteban when Slade contacted him in the kitchen. The carters were still quite lively, but it had been a hard day with an explosive climax, and before long everybody called it a night. 14. Quite a few people examined the body the following afternoon, but to Slade's and the sheriff's disappointment, nobody was able to impart information relative to the murdered man. I've a notion, Slade said, that he came in on one of the east-west late trains and didn't have time to contact anybody before he was killed. Sounds reasonable, the sheriff conceded. Wonder why he showed tip in the branding pen. May have been told about it, Slade replied. Had been told it was a good place to meet people, or he may have been in this section before. One thing is sure for certain, Bard knew he was coming and was waiting for an opportunity to kill him before he could talk with anybody. The murdering devil, growled Crane. And no doubt but he's got your name down on his list in big letters, but I hope to give him a lesson in spelling. Slade smiled. Oh, you will, all right, the sheriff predicted with confidence. Well, reckon we'd better get down to the station and see how Mary and her boys are making out. They were all on the job a little while ago. Guess we could do worse, Slade replied. Blount will be here shortly to take over and accommodate the curious. Let's go. They locked the door and set out, threading their way through the crowds on the street. It was seldom without them. Reaching the station, they found a bustle of activity, the work of loading the carts proceeding smoothly despite the racket the carters were kicking up. Be finished before dark, Mary said. And now that you're here to keep me company, I'm going to have some coffee and a sandwich. Saxon can carry on without me for a little while. A fine notion, applauded the sheriff, and a snort or two won't go bad, either. Slade settled for coffee. Heard anything more concerning Kenneth Burdnell? Mary asked as they walked to the branding pen. Not a thing, Slade replied. Seems nobody ever heard of him. Mary nodded her shining curls. I predict we'll hear something in Echo, she said. If he was interested in the oil wells, and it seems he was, surely somebody around the Echo field must have contacted him. It is possible, Slade conceded. They reached the branding pen without misadventure, where all their wants were quickly cared for. Mary finished her coffee and hurried back to the station. Slade and the sheriff remained in the branding pen, smoking and talking, with an occasional snort for Crane. Do you know, he remarked reflectively, I've a notion the little gal has something there, that surely somebody in Echo must have contacted Kenneth Burdnell, or know something about him. As I said before, it is possible, Slade replied. Really, I'm almost inclined to say probably. Well, owners are a clannish lot in what one knows, others are liable to know, too. Maybe Estevan will have something to tell us when he shows up, as I figure he will soon. Estevan did show up shortly, and he did have something to tell them. Capitan, he said, his eyes snapping. The Ladrone and 6 others rode east by north, headed for Echo, remarked Crane, or to hole up in one of the breaks and wait for us tomorrow, Slade said. You take all the fun out of life, groaned the sheriff. Now I'll be seeing owl hoots behind every tree trunk. Waiter, Slade laughed and ordered more coffee. Estevan retired to the kitchen and his amigos there. However, Slade did not dismiss the warning as lightly as he intimated. Danebard was a most uncertain character and had proven himself capable of anything. No telling what he had up his sleeve. Slade gave him credit for outstanding ability and cold ruthlessness. The later afternoon drew to a close. As the sun set in its flaming, multicolored glory, the carters came whooping in, their work finished. The carts were packing one of the biggest loads ever, and another bonus danced before their eyes. Mary and Saxon were not far behind them, folding their tally sheets and storing them away, and greatly pleased with everything. The well owners are going to be tickled pink, predicted Saxon. We've got a lot more for them than they expected, and the boys are going to be tickled with the bonus money they'll get, said Mary, and I'll settle for something to eat. How about you, Walt? I think I'll join you, El Hakon answered. Been quite a while since that sandwich, which is all I've had today, and I can stand something to hold my snorts down, said the sheriff. Waiter, they ate slowly, enjoying their dinner to the full. Mary and Saxon chatted gaily, the sheriff putting in a word now and then, but Slade was mostly silent, for he was beating his brains out in an endeavor to determine what Danebard might be up to, with no success. Finally he dismissed the whole matter from his mind, for the time being, and joined in the conversation. The carters were lively, but moderately so, having the following day in the roll to Echo in mind, so they didn't quite raise the ceiling or cause the roof beams to creak. Slate and Mary danced several numbers, then she had a couple with Saxon. After a little, Slate and Mary exchanged nods, which included Saxon. It had been a full day. The train rolled for Echo a bit past mid-morning, giving the cart horses, which were beginning to show the strain, some additional hours rest. With the extra heavy loads, Slade ordered a rather slow pace. The weather had changed. Instead of a flood of sunshine, the sky was overcast, a chill wind blowing from the east. The prairie grasses were ripples of shadow. The birds were unusually quiet, which, as a rule, presaged falling weather. Yes, looks like we might get a wetting before we catch Echo, Mary said, but we'll make out. Takes more than a few drops of water to hold up the marrow carts, and it may inconvenience your Owlhood amigos. Hope you're right, Slade replied. Anyhow, here we go. The first of the 4 stands of breaks came into view, dark and ominous under the leaden sky. Slade and Esteban scouted ahead. More watchful and alert than ordinary, they threaded their way through the grim tangle. Slade thought it very unlikely that anything would be attempted in the first stand, but he was taking no chances. Not with Dane Bard. Nothing happened. They watched the carts emerge from the east straggle. The carts were shouting greetings, rode with Mary and Saxon and the sheriff until the second stand could be seen, then speeded up again. The second stand was a replica of the first, as Slade was confident it would be, but the third may be something different, to say nothing of the fourth, he observed to Esteban. From now on we've certainly got to be on our toes. So be it shall as Capitan says will, Esteban returned cheerfully. They rode on slowly, Slade scanning the prairie in every direction. According to what Esteban saw the evening before, there were half a dozen ruthless killers, and Dane Bard, prowling around somewhere, presumably between Sanderson and Echo, and on such a day of shadows even the open rangeland should not be neglected. However, they saw nothing. The prairie remained lonely and deserted. They reached the third breaks, entered cautiously. They had gone but a short distance when Slade called a halt. He swung down from the saddle and began to carefully scan the ground, Esteban watching him curiously. A couple more strides, still scanning the ground, and he turned and went back to Esteban and the waiting mounts. Yesterday evening, he announced, at least a dozen horses, perhaps 2 or 3 more, passed through here, not all going in the same direction. May mean nothing, but it's interesting. Yesterday evening you saw Dane Bard and 6 others heading this way. Looks like about twice that number were on the prowl here. Guess it behooves us to be more than usually alert. They were, but they passed through the third stand without incident and pulled aside to let the cart train roll past. Slade gestured toward the fourth and last stand. Show down there, if there's going to be one, he said. Esteban nodded, and now it was raining. The carts appeared. Slade gestured to the sheriff. Come along with us this last sachet, Tom, he said. Mary, take it easy from now on. You're going to get wet anyhow, and the horses are tired. Okay, dear, the girl replied. Be seeing you in the diehard. An optimistic view of the situation, Slade thought, and hoped she was right. He and Crane and Esteban rode east. With the rain harder, the fourth stand appeared. They reached it, eased in, thankful that the chaparral at least provided some shelter from the rain, which was now pelting down. They were less than halfway through the growth when Slade struck an attitude of listening. Horses coming from both directions, he announced. Into the brush with us. Tense, expectant, they crowded into the growth and waited. Around the bend to the east bulged 7 horsemen. From the west came 8 more. A jerking of frightened horses to a halt, yells, curses, and a roaring gun. Battle was underway. Slade, Esteban, and the sheriff were highly interested spectators. For several moments the guns blazed and thundered. A voice bellowed a command. The bunch from the east whirled their horses and went charging back the way they had come. The bunch from the west, what was left of them, went scally-hooting back the way they had come. Left behind were 6 bodies lying prone in the soaked of the trail. Slade motioned for silence. Both bunches kept on going, he said. They'll bulge into the cart train, exclaimed the sheriff. They'll be well out on the prairie before the train arrives, Slade deferred. And I feel safe in predicting they won't hanker for any more trouble. We'll wait here for the carts. What in blazes was it all about, wondered Crane. Either a falling out among outlaws or a case of a mistaken identity on both sides. Slade replied. Good, chortled the sheriff. Less work for us, with an approving nod at the 6 bodies lying in the trail, dimly seen, for it was now almost full dark. Slade smiled and rolled a smoke. A fairly short wait and the carts rumbled around a bend, Mary and Saxon leading, both holding a cocked rifle. Slade uttered reassuring shouts, and the carts jostled to a halt. Was just like it happened the other day, Mary said. We heard a lot of shooting, and then a bunch of riders tore out of the growth and headed west and south. Knew very well you were mixed up in it. Whatever it was, so we came to find out what did happen, they told her. She shook her bright curls. The poor horses, she said, wandering around in the rain. They'll make out till they're picked up, Slade reassured her. There'll be some cowhands in the diehard who'll be glad to ride out and grab 'em. Finders keepers. That makes me feel better, the girl smiled. Well, hadn't we better roll to Echo? A notion, approved the sheriff. I feel a hankering for a few snorts, and the rain's letting up. Load the carcasses, boys, and drop them off at the office. Let's go. 15 Without further excitement, they reached Echo. The bodies were disposed of, the loaded carts lined, the horses stabled. Slade and Mary repaired to their rooms in Lemur's quarters to don dry clothes and clean up a bit. The sheriff had a change at Raider's place, where he slept. Esteban holed up in the kitchen. The carters boomed into the diehard in search of sustenance of various sorts. Such a small matter as damp clothes inconvenienced them not at all. Slade and Mary entered, to the accompaniment of cheers from the carters. Raider joined them at their table. "Heard something that I think may interest you," he said. "How's that?" Slade asked. Raider paused a moment, then said, "Dane Bard was over to the field this morning, asking a lot of questions relative to the production of those wells he claims to own a half interest in. Seemed to know a lot about the business." "That is interesting," Slade replied. "Thanks for telling me." Raider smiled and nodded, and returned to the far end of the bar. "Hellion has plenty of confidence in himself," Slade remarked, apropos of Dane Bard. "Figure he has everything safe in the bag. What happened this evening may have given him considerable of a jolt. However, you believe he was with one of those bunches that had a fight in the breaks?" "I'm confident it was his voice that shouted the order to hightail," Slade replied. "And what does it all mean?" "I don't know for sure," Slade answered, "but I hope it means some sort of a split in his ranks, and that possibly his followers, or some of them, at least, are losing confidence in him. Just theory on my part, of course, but such things have happened. A leader must produce results to keep his men in line, and Bard hasn't been producing very well of late, which may have created a ruckus among his men. Guesswork on my part, but we'll see. Anyhow, I expect him to try and pull something." And soon Mary glanced at the door. "Here comes Uncle Westbrook, with Uncle Tom right behind him," she said. "Now we can eat, and I'm starved." Lerner and the sheriff sat down. Slade waved at the kitchen where there was activity at once. Lerner wanted details of the gunfight in the breaks. Slade obliged. "It sure must have been something to watch," Lerner said. "Yes, it was," Slade agreed. "And we had box scats for the performance, but you can be assured that we didn't indulge in any cheering or hand-clapping. We were content to be among the missing." "I can appreciate that," Lerner chuckled. "Too much lead flying around to take part in dodging it." "Thank heaven you didn't have to," said Mary. "I wish the kitchen boys would speed up a bit. I'm famished." The kitchen force obliged, and soon they were partaking of an appetizing meal, after which, Slade and Mary danced. The carters whooped and sang, but there was another hard day ahead of them, and midnight found the diehard pretty well deserted. Around noon the following day, the 6 bodies on the sheriff's floor were given an exhaustive examination, Slade hoping to discover something of importance. 2 were former cowhands, the other 4 had worked around oil fields quite a bit. The pockets divulged only the trinkets men carry, and not much money, which means that Bard will be making a try for something that promises a good haul, and soon, Slade said. "We've got to try and anticipate and get the jump on him. There's just a chance that he may make a desperate move of some sort that will play into our hands, but that's in the nature of wishful thinking and we can't depend on it. And you still ain't figured the meaning of that ruckus in the breaks." "I'm inclined more and more to believe each bunch thought that they were contacting the cart's convoy," the ranger answered, "and that somehow somebody blundered." "Sounds reasonable," Crane conceded. He fetched coffee from the back room, where it was kept steaming hot. They drank it as slowly, enjoying a couple of smokes. Then Crane unlocked and opened the door to allow the curious to come in for a look, this time with more results than usual. Several night bartenders recalled serving one or more of the dead men, but nothing much about them. Appeared they were well behaved and didn't talk much. Gave the impression of being strangers to Echo. Nothing remarkable about that, however, with all the oil town's comings and goings. "Same old story," growled the sheriff. "Nobody knows from nothing. Let's amble down to the station and see how Mary is making out. Here comes Deputy Arbaugh to take over here." They walked slowly through the crowded streets and contacted nothing out of the ordinary. Arriving at the cart station, they found the unloading going forward at full speed, Lemur lending a hand. The carters, with visions of bonus money dancing in their heads, were in a gay mood and doing excellent work. "Just in time for the diehard and a snack," Mary said. "Guess who was in the diehard this morning?" "Who?" "Mr. Dane Bard, no less. Looked to be in a bad temper. He'll be in a worse one before Walt is finished with him." growled Crane. "Let's go." I feel the need of a snort. They reached the Die Hard and the snack was forthcoming, a rather elaborate one, for the kitchen help knew they were serving El Halcon and took pains to make it as so, and that helped a lot, Mary said, a little later. "Now I can really get some work done." She kept them company while they had a smoke and then trotted back to the station. A few minutes and Lemur came in for his snack and smoke. "Everybody happy," he said, including the WCLL owners, who didn't expect anything like the shipment they got, casings and other stuff they are badly in need of. They handed Mary a bonus for the boys that will open their eyes. "I predict a wild night for the Die Hard." The next visitor was Saxon. "The boys may have a couple of days off to celebrate," he announced. "Would have tomorrow, of course. They are in good shape, but the cart horses are still pretty well worn out. Was a hard trip on them, so I feel safe in saying they'll get another day of rest to recuperate." "A very good idea," Slade said. "You don't lose anything by keeping your stock in good shape. And be careful what you do with the little critters given under your hand." The sheriff and Lemur nodded sober agreement. The latter finished his coffee and hurried out to give Mary a hand. The sheriff called for another snort. "What do you say, Tom? We walk through the South Railroad cut and watch the sunset," Slade suggested. "Suits me," the sheriff readily agreed. "That is always a nice walk. I know you often take it." "Let's go." "Take it easy," Slade admonished. "There's no hurry. Finish your drink and I'll finish my smoke, and then we'll go." When the glass was empty they departed. Neither Raider nor Esteban was in evidence. They skirted the cart station, waving to Mary, whose gaze followed them dubiously. The rain had ceased before daybreak and it was pleasant walking in the warm glow. They glanced in several places but did not pause. Gradually they drew near the north mouth of the cut. Slade's eyes were everywhere and, with the cut mouth but a few strides distant, his gaze focused on something that interested him. 4 men, quite a ways to the west, riding swiftly south. If they continued on the course they were following, it would take them to where the old trail flowed down the rise slope from the crest. As they reached the cut, in a few words he told the sheriff what he saw, and in my opinion, he concluded, the devils will ride the trail over the crest, down the south slope, circle around and enter the cut from the south, meet us and be all set for a little chore of murder. It's well known that I frequently walk the cut to view the sunset and I feel pretty sure that our amigo Danebard or someone of his ilk visioned opportunity. Do you ever miss a bet?" sighed the sheriff. "And what are we going to do about it? If you don't mind taking a chance, we'll hole up in the brush about halfway through the cut and, with a little luck, give those enterprising gents something to remember us by." "I'll take a chance," Crane growled reply. "Be glad of the chance to take a chance." Meanwhile they had entered the cut and just inside it, Slade flattened himself against the growth that paralleled the tracks. From where he could see but not be seen, a couple of minutes and he said, "I was right, they are right up the trail. Let's go. The odds will be against us, but we should enjoy the advantage of surprise, and being on our feet. That should sort of even things." At a fairly fast pace he led the way, peering and listening, although he didn't really think there was a second bunch holed up somewhere in the cut. But with Danebard he was taking no chances. Somewhat more than halfway through and Slade called a halt at a spot where the growth was excellent for his purpose. A word to the sheriff and they holed up with tree trunks to lean against. The chaparral clothing the slopes as it was, they would provide very poor targets for the killers. A rather long wait ensued. Then Slade's ears caught the sound of slowly pacing horses, coming from the south. "Get set for business," he whispered to Crane. On came the horses, their riders talking among themselves. Slade caught what was being said. "I tell you we might as well keep right on going to town," said a querulous voice. They never came through the cut. They headed back to town. "We're just wasting our time," another voice grumbled assent. A couple more minutes and the 4 riders came into view around a shallow bend. Each carried a gun in his hand. Their intention was plain, shoot on sight. Snake-blooded murder, no less. A flame of wrath enveloped Slade. He would be justified in shooting the ruthless devils without giving them a chance. But he was a Texas Ranger, bound by the stem code of the Rangers. His voice blared at them. "Up, you are under arrest. In the name of the state of Texas." A chattering of alarm. Guns jutted forward, blazed. Both Slade's Colts thundered, and there was one down. He and the sheriff shot together, and there were 2 forms in the dust again, those thundering .45s, and there were 3 riderless saddles. The 4th killer, in a welter of frantic horses, dust and smoke, spun his mount around the bend and vanished from sight. Hoofbeats dimmed south. "Hold it, everything under control," Slade shouted to the sheriff, who was wasting ammunition on cadavers. "More floor decorations, plumb nice ones, the shape they're in now. Per usual, you figured everything just right, putting us in the brush where and how you did. I don't think the skunks ever really saw us. They sure shot over us. Look at the leaves they brought down." "Think the one who got away might have been Bard," Crane added. "I rather doubt it," Slade replied. "Hard to tell, though, hat brims pulled down low, neckerchiefs pulled high. Well, guess we'd better mosey to the cart station and allay the fears there. Rather likely the shooting was heard and Mary will be wondering, and feeling sure we got into a mix-up." The shooting had been heard, and Mary was not at all surprised that they had been in the middle of it, and would hear details later. The carters, their chore of unloading practically finished, whooped at the chance of bringing the bodies in. "They have the damnedest notions of what's fun," Mary lamented. "Oh, well, everybody to their taste, and speaking of taste, I haven't tasted food for so long TVE forgotten what it's like. Everything's under control here and I'm heading to my room. When I come back, I'll expect to be seeing you, Walt, dear." She scampered away, the carters cheering her. They were cheering everybody, the well owners having handed them a whopping big bonus. Soon the diehard would be cheering, the till bell singing a joyous song. 16 Slade and the sheriff reached diehard without having to evasively answer questions. Others than the carters and the well owners, who were cleaning up odds and ends of materials, had heard the shooting and had seen Slade and Crane coming from the cut. "Wait till the carters handling the bodies come back from the office," Slade said. "They'll be spreading a tale really worth listening to, and Deputy Arbaugh will be trying to figure what it's all about. He'll take care of the office angle, and I reckon you and I will look the carcasses over after a bit, eh?" said the sheriff. "That's right," the ranger replied. "After we have dinner." As they occupied their table, Lemur and Saxon arrived and were given the lowdown on what happened. "The devils are sure after you, Walt," Lemur said. "After you hot and heavy, but not having much luck," El Halcon replied carelessly. "Every time they tangle with Tom and me, they come out the little end of the horn." Nice cheerful viewpoint, but it doesn't seem to affect either one of you, so I reckon you'll make out. Here comes Mary, let's hear what she thinks about it. "Oh, I am used to it," the girl answered. "I've stopped worrying about him too much. He always comes out on top," put in the sheriff with a certain voice intonation that caused her to make a face at him. "I'm hungry," she said. The sheriff beckoned a waiter. The carters who had packed the bodies to the sheriff's office returned, and added their voices to the general pandemonium, which was growing wilder by the minute. Although most of the carters were still eating, to Mary's satisfaction, the dinner arrived on time and was enjoyed by all. A little later Crane thought it would be a good idea to relieve Arbaugh and give the 3 bodies a going over, against the chance that they might reveal something of interest. Slade agreed and they set out. "And please try to get back sooner, I will start worrying," Mary called after them. "Let you out of my sight and you're into trouble." They found Arbaugh alone in the office, so they sent him to the diehard to eat. Crane locked the door and they examined the bodies. They were ordinary appearing specimens, nothing outstanding about them. Their pockets yielded more money than the last batch. "The price of murder," Slade said. "Now I'm sure the one that escaped was not Bard. All 4 were hired hands paid to do a chore. Guns for hire type." "Guess you're right," replied the sheriff. "Well, guess they didn't earn their pay." "Looks a little that way," Slade conceded. "One thing is sure for certain, these 3 are not going to do any spending." The sheriff shook with laughter. "But I bet odd and Bart ain't laughing," he chuckled. "Wonder if the hellion will ever get sense enough to lay off you." "Not so long as he figures he has a chance to cash in," Slade answered. "He's the sort that never quits." "Well," said Crane, as Esteban would say it, "he's going to end up quitted." "Hope you're right," Slade smiled. He glanced at the clock. "Guess we've done all we can here and had better go back to the diehard before Mary comes looking for us. For some reason she doesn't seem to trust us out alone. Wonder why." Slade smiled again, but did not further discuss the matter. Crane unlocked and opened the door. "Come back later," he told several individuals who wished to enter. "Deputy Arbaugh will be here and look after you." While they were still a block away they could hear the carters making merry. "And it's catching," snorted the sheriff. "Every other hellion around figures he's got to horn in, but they're harmless," Slade replied. Just noise and skylarking, not a quarrelsome bunch. You don't have to worry about the Carters nor those who join them. We could do with others of the same sort. Damn hard on the eardrum, though, Crane grunted. My head's beginning to ache already. Betcha we find Mary fresh as a daisy and wanting to dance. We could do with more of her sort, too. The good Lord never made anything finer than a good woman. Well, here we are. Get ready to duck. They really did not need to duck. No bottles were being thrown, which was not always the case in some echo places, as they very well knew. Mary greeted them with simulated surprise. What, she exclaimed. No bodies. Will wonders never cease? Of course I want to dance. Been wanting to all evening. Come on, Walt. They did several numbers, doing as well as could be expected on the crowded floor. She also danced with Lerner and Saxon, while Slade and the sheriff smoked and talked. Suddenly the sheriff gave vent to a loud chuckle, shaking his grizzled head. And now what? Slade asked. I was just thinking, Crane replied, that if we keep on going like we are, we'll be packing a cartload of carcasses to Sanderson. Well, we could do worse. Looked like once or twice that we'd have the chore of packing ourselves. Would have been attended with certain difficulty, Slade pointed out, but I think I get what you mean. Mary skipped over from the dance floor, demanding a sip of coffee and a sandwich. Both were quickly forthcoming, giving the sheriff an excuse for another snort of red-eye. A real nice night, so far at least, Mary said. No trouble of any sort. Everybody happy and saying so. They're saying it all right, grunted the sheriff. Anybody within a mile will agree to that. Blazes, what a racket. Gives me the shivers. Mary shook a finger at him. Never mind, Uncle Tom. You're enjoying it all as much as the rest of us, she reproved. Just good clean fun. The boys have earned it. Oh, I guess they have, Crane admitted. So let 'em whoop. Mary laughed, glanced at the swinging doors and waved a hand. Hello, look who's here, she exclaimed. A group of well owners had entered. They paused at the table. We had to drop in and say hello to the boys, one explained. They sure did us a big favor today. Lack of the unexpected stuff they brought us today was costing us plenty. He beckoned Raider, said a few words to the die-hard owner, who grinned and nodded and raised his hand. A drink for everybody on these gentlemen, he shouted. A resounding cheer shook the rafters. Glasses hammered the bar. Nice people, Mary said as the group moved over to mingle with the Carters. Slate and the sheriff voiced agreement. The advent of the owners further enlivened things that were already lively enough. They stayed for quite a while before departing to care for some chores connected with the big shipment. The hours walks along with no lessening of the hilarity. If anything, it increased. Walt, the sheriff suddenly remarked, here comes a feller I don't think you've met. Name's Vibbet, Sam Vibbet. He owns a place over at the east edge of the field. No other rumhole close by, and he does plenty of business with the oil field workers. Seems to be all right. I'll get him over and introduce him. Vibbet was a pleasant-looking middle-aged individual. The sheriff caught his eye and beckoned him to join them. Vibbet accepted the invitation and Crane performed the introductions. I've heard of Mr. Slade, Vibbet said. Heard plenty of good about him. Have a drink, and drop over to my place when you have a chance, Mr. Slade. It's called a new claim. Thank you, I will, the ranger promised. He liked Vibbet's looks. Vibbet chatted for a few minutes and then moved to the far end of the bar where he talked with Raider. Vince likes him, said Crane, and Vince Raider doesn't take up with everybody. Yep, I'd say he's all right. Slade was comfortable and relaxed, with no premonition of trouble building up. Yes, a nice night, he told Mary. One of the nicest ever, the girl agreed. This time you're all mine. Now it was not too far from daybreak and sheer exhaustion was quieting down the Carters. The cook stuck his head out the kitchen door and shook it. Evidently Esteban had nothing to report. Dawn in the Echo Basin was always a vista of outstanding beauty. The great bowl filled with purple-blue shadows, while on the crests played strange and glorious fires. Through this scene of loveliness, Slate and Mary and Lerner walked slowly to the oil magnate's quarters, with Esteban strolling behind, hand on the haft of his long throwing blade. A little breeze stirred the grass heads. A bird in a thicket sang a liquid note, and it was day. It had been a wonderful night. 17 The bodies of the slain outlaws had been loaded into a cart for transport to Sanderson, and the sheriff regarded his bare floor with disapproval as he and Slade sat in the office the following afternoon and discussed the problems that confronted them. After a while the talk turned to Sam Vibbet, the owner of the New Claim restaurant and saloon. Where's he from, do you know? Slade asked. Panhandle country, Crane replied. Got tired of bucking the weather there, which is often bad, winter and summer, as you know. Had a chance to buy the New Claim. Took it over, did a lot of work on it and is making it go. The day passed uneventful. The same applied to the following. The horses were well rested, the cart was rummy to go. Before mid-morning of the next day found a long train of empty carts rolling through the railroad cut, in bright sunshine. With them rode Slade and the sheriff and Esteban, Slade being of the opinion that the next activity, whenever it might be, would take place in or around Sanderson. Yes, I guess you can call it a hunch, he replied to Crane's question. Here we go again, exclaimed that worthy, blithely. And you believe Bart is going to try to work something in Sanderson? He asked. That's my opinion, Slade answered. I think he may feel that Echo is a mite too hot for him to operate there right now, and Sanderson is his logical objective. We'll never know any peace until he is out of the way, Mary remarked morosely. Just a matter of time, said the sheriff. And time's running out fast for that sidewinder, you can bet all your pesos on that. The train rolled out of the shadowy cut and into the sparkling sunshine of the prairie. The carters whooped joyously, the horses snorted and tossed their heads, glad of a chance to stretch their legs after a long rest. The first of the 4 stands of breaks came into view. Slade and Esteban scouted ahead. They entered a band of growth alert and wary, for they were taking no chances with the unpredictable Dane Bard, who might do exactly the opposite of what anybody thought he would do. And in his book El Halcon was dated for a rendezvous with death at the first opportunity. However, they passed through the first stand without encountering difficulty and waited at the west edge for the carts to catch up, Mary and the sheriff reaching them first. So far so good, said Crane. 1 down and 3 to go, and we'll soon be chopping down the odds. That's the right attitude, Uncle Tom, Mary told him. Don't look for trouble. It'll come along by itself soon enough. And if more people subscribed to that philosophy, it would be a better world, Slade commented. Okay, Tom, Esteban, let's go. At a swift pace they rode across the prairie and soon reached the second stand of breaks. The second stand was a repeat performance of the first, only it seemed darker and quieter. Even the bird calls seemed muted. Was it a warning? Slade wondered. An omen to heed. A sign of what? Dark and terrible, was already gathering its forces to move toward them from the west. It would soon be wreathed in shadows. He laughed at his own vivid imagination and rode on, devoid of apprehension. The third stand looked even gloomier than the other 2, for now the sun was dropping down the long slant of the western sky, and the growth that encroached on the trail seemed to reach clutching fingers to bar their progress. Gave one an eerie feeling. Trees that had stood so sedately in the bright sunlight were no longer trees but malevolent forms of life with an intelligence, a sinister intelligence, all their own. Slade laughed again at himself and rode on, and without unpleasantness of any sort. They reached the western edge of the stand, and reined in to wait for the carts that pulled to a halt. When Slade ordered them to do so, he sat gazing toward where was the still unseen last stand. Mary, he said, roll on not quite so fast. Give me time to get set with what one have in mind. If anything is going to be tried, it will be in that 4th stand, and I'd a feeling that something is going to be tried. Tom, he told the sheriff, you ride with Esteban and me from here on. We ride north right at the edge of this stand, keeping as close to the brush as we can and out of sight. I may be a mite too cautious, but we have nothing to lose and perhaps a lot to be gained. All right, let's go. He waved to Mary, and to Saxon, who was cradling his rifle alongside his plump money pouch, and led the way north at a fast pace, until they were almost at the north edge of the stand. He held the gate in the direction, then he veered straight west. He was forced to hold back shadow, so the others could keep up. The 4th stand came into view, dark and ominous. Slade constantly scanned the terrain ahead, studying the bristles of growth from root to crown. With nothing happening, they reached the east straggle of the 4th stand. There, hugging the brush, he changed the direction to due south. The makings of a very nice setup for somebody who hopes to make a try for Saxon's money pouch, he said. That is if somebody in the chaparral alongside the trail has designs on it. Of course I don't know about that for sure, just in the nature of guesswork on my part. Oh, there's somebody holed up there, snorted the sheriff. You wouldn't be taking all this trouble if there wasn't? You know darn well there is, now don't you? Answer that a little later, Slade said, his eyes still ahead. Suddenly he uttered an exclamation. Now I'll answer your question, Tom. Yes, I know there's somebody holed up in the brush, waiting. Look ahead, and up high. See the tree swaying back and forth, though there's not a breath of wind? A rope noosed about halfway up the trunk, with somebody hauling on the rope will produce that effect. You mean they plan to drop across the trail in front of the carts? The sheriff exclaimed. That would stop them. All right. Slade shook his head. That's an old trick, he said. I know of several times it's been tried. That's what our amigo Bard wants us to believe. He'll know very well that I would see that tree top swaying, just as he would were he in my place. He figures we'll fall for his little stratagem, come barging in ahead of the carts and into the trap he has set for us. Very clever, but not clever enough to fool El Halcon, growled the sheriff. How do you figure to work it? A little farther and we'll dismount and hole up our mounts. Shadow will stay right where I put him till I call for him, and your Cayuse and Estevan's Mustang will stay with Shadow. Then we'll ease along through the brush until we sight the trail. I think they'll be on the south side of the trail, or maybe out in it, watching for us and the carts to appear. With no bad luck, we should get the drop on them, but be ready to shoot fast and shoot straight. Chances are we'll have to do just that, although I must give them the chance to surrender. I doubt they'll take it. Everything understood? Okay, here we'll leave our critters, into the bush with them. That chore taken care of, they eased along toward the trail. Soon they heard voices. The devils were there. All right. The sheriff dropped a hand to his gun butt. Estevan swung his long blade in casting position. Another moment and they saw the outlaws, 6 of them, lounging in the trail, gazing east. Slade shouted, "Hands up, you are under arrest." With startled exclamations, the owl hoots whirled toward the sound of his voice, went for their holsters. "Let them have it," he roared as he drew and shot with both hands. The sheriff's gun boomed echo, the distance too great for knife work. Estevan also was firing as fast as he could squeeze trigger. The outlaws fought back with blazing guns. Again the brake's growth jumped and quivered to a crashing gun battle. 2 fell under the posse's first volley. Slade fired again and again. The sheriff's arm spouted fire and smoke, and there were 3 down. The roar of Slade's big .45s shook leaves from the trees, and there were 4 prone forms. The remaining 2 dashed into the growth and out of sight. Slade tried to race in pursuit, but he had to cross the trail, and before he could untangle himself from the matted horses, he heard hoofs beating the ground westward. The pair had made good their escape, but a nice collection of floor decorations chortled the sheriff. Figure one of that pair was Bard. Hard to tell, Slade replied as he reloaded. Hat brims pulled low, neckerchiefs up high, and a lot of dust and powder smoke. Hard to tell. Nobody hurt. Hunkering down paid off again, said Crane. They shot over us, but my blade did not drink, Estevan complained. Seen off PDF.com. You did all right with your shooting irons, Slade comforted him. I saw one you'd line sights with go down. Estevan felt better. Here come the carts, Crane called. Mary in front per usual. The carts rumbled in. Explanations followed. Load up the bodies and let's get going, Slade ordered. We'll be full dark in another 20 minutes, and everybody is hungry, and I'm not letting you out of my sight again, Mary declared. Heavens, what a man. 18 across the rangeland rolled a long train of empties, the carters whooping and singing. Soon the lights of Sanderson sparkled in the distance. Everybody thought it had been a very good day. Larger and brighter grew the lights. The mutter and grumble of the busy railroad town reached their ears. The carters sang louder as the train reached the outer fringe of streets, rolled on into the heart of the town. The cart containing the bodies of the outlaws veered to the sheriff's office and unloaded its grisly burden. The others continued to the station. Deputy Blount received the bodies and the last car took its place at the station. There all were lined up for loading. The horses were cared for. The carters descended on Hard Rock Hogan's Branding Pen Saloon, where business immediately picked up. Slade and Mary retired to their rooms in the Reagan house to brush up a bit. He and the sheriff would examine the bodies later. First, something to eat was in order. They decided to let the bodies be until later. They weren't going anywhere. The sheriff hurried to his casa and checked there. He returned to the branding pen and he and Slade waited for Mary. She arrived shortly, looking, to employ the sheriff's expression, fresh as a daisy, and declaring she was starved. The kitchen force at once started preparations to care for that. Saxon, the head carter, joined them. Esteban was holed up in the kitchen with his amigos there. While they were waiting for their dinner, Hard Rock, the branding pen owner, paused at their table for a few words. Hard Rock was not, at first sight, a prepossessing-looking person. He was big and powerfully built, had an underslung jaw, a wide, almost reptilian mouth, a crooked nose, bristling red hair, and narrowed eyes of palest green. But he was a square shooter in every sense of the word, and Walt Slade liked and respected him. A former miner and prospector, he had made a good strike and invested the proceeds in the branding pen, and quickly realized that he had made an even better strike, the place catching on at once and soon becoming the most popular and prosperous establishment of its kind in Sanderson. The branding pen was big and brightly lighted. It had a long, shining bar, a big lunch counter, tables for more leisurely diners, others for games. Bartenders and doormen were sprucely dressed, with everything spotlessly clean. The dance floor was commodious, the girls young and pretty and, like their boss, strictly straight shooters. Hard Rock would have no other kind. Nobody ever had to worry about anything from a square deal in the branding pen. Treat folks right and the big majority will treat you right, was Hard Rock's motto. Mary's arrival had been very much in the nature of a small, very small, edition of a Carter hurricane and set them to whooping louder than ever. Now, with food on the way, they had quieted down somewhat. The sight of the kitchen force bearing succulent burdens caused her to give a squeal of delight and go to work on the cook's offering with a will. Slade, Saxon and the sheriff were also hungry, and complimented the kitchen force by cleaning their plates, in seconds. "And now I'll soon be ready to dance," Mary said with a sigh of satisfaction, sipping her small glass of wine. The sheriff charged his old black pipe with even blacker tobacco. Slade and Saxon rolled smokes. After finishing his smoke, Slade sauntered to the kitchen to thank in person the cook and his helpers for the excellence of the repast, which greatly pleased them, for to serve El Halcon is the honor great. "In a little while the sheriff and I will be going over to the office to examine those last 4 additions to the body collection," he told Esteban, who nodded his understanding. Before taking on the chore, Slade danced several numbers with Mary, then turned her over to Saxon's care until they returned. "And please come back soon, and don't get mixed up in something," she begged. "We've got a big day of loading those empties tomorrow, and I think we've had enough excitement for today." Slade promised they'd do the best they could, and he and Crane strolled out. Reaching the office, they found quite a number of curious citizens present, who asked questions, and commented on the appearance of the dead outlaws, lowing they were hard-case devils and that the section was well rid of them, to which last Slade and the sheriff agreed. Finally the office was cleared, the door shut and locked, and they gave the bodies a careful going over, but with scant results. The pockets turned out a miscellany of trinkets and not much money, which means, Slade said, that Dane Bard will undoubtedly be busy soon. "Trouble coming up, Tom. I'll be glad of it, if it just gives me a chance to align sights with the Sidewinder," Crane growled. "Here's hoping you get the chance," Slade replied cheerfully. "Blount, when you get tired of being pestered, lock up and come to the branding pen for some drinks," he told the deputy. "Thanks, I'll do that," Blount promised. Slade and the sheriff headed for the branding pen. "Reckon Doc Cooper, the coroner, will want to hold a sort of inquest on the collection of carcasses tomorrow," Crane remarked as they wormed their way through the crowded streets. "He figures he and his work dodgers of a coroner's jury have to do something to earn their pay. Well, here we are. Let's go in and get our scolding." However, Mary was not in a scolding mood. She just wanted to dance. Slade obliged, glad to get off so easy, and they did several numbers despite the jam-packed conditions of the floor, causing the sheriff to chuckle. Deputy Blount, having cleared the office and locked up, joined them and gratefully accepted a drink. The carters were still quite lively, but less so, for it was past midnight with a big day of loading right around the corner, and though not a bad one, it had been a long and hard day. After a bit, Mary caught Saxon's eye and nodded. Soon everybody sought rest. The following afternoon, Slade and the sheriff, while rested, were not restful. Their problem, Dane Bard and what his next move might be, still beset them. That he would strike somewhere and soon, Slade was convinced, where and when were the questions to which they didn't have the answers, and until they got the answers to both questions, there would be no real peace of mind for either. The coroner held his inquest, a monotonous repetition of those that had gone before. The law enforcement officers were exonerated of all blame and commended for doing the community a big favor. Court adjourned. "And now," said Slade, "I guess we'd better amble over to the cart station and see how the loading is coming along. Certainly nothing we can do here except look out the windows, and that gets monotonous as one of Doc Cooper's inquests." "You're damn right," growled the sheriff. "Blount can mind the shop for a while. Let's go." When they reached the station, they found it a hive of activity. A trainload of stuff from the east came in right after noon. Mary told them, "We're unloading it from the cars to the carts as fast as we can." Means another whopping big shipment to Echo. Naturally the boys, seeing another hefty bonus coming their way, are doing their damnedest. "I have all hopes of being able to roll for Echo in the morning. I sure hope you, Walt, and you, Uncle Tom, will ride with us. Looks like, from here, that we may," Slade replied. "If nothing unforeseen takes place, I feel safe in saying that we will, and it will be wonderful," the girl said. "Is beginning to look like this is my week, in more ways than one." "Here's hoping," Slade answered, "and hope our amigo Bard doesn't pull a rabbit out of the hat." "He'll pull out more than a rabbit," growled Crane. "He'll think he's got a full-fledged grizzly by the ears, before we're finished with him." Mary laughed and trotted back to her work. Slade and the sheriff proceeded to prowl the town, pausing briefly at various places, Slade studying faces, listening to snatches of conversation his keen ears caught, but learned nothing of consequence. They explored the railroad yards, talked with the yardmaster and others. The yardmaster asked Slade's opinion, which he valued highly, on various matters and was greatly pleased by the ranger's laudatory comments. Finally, with the sun dropping down the western sky, they left the yards and continued their stroll through the streets, gradually working their way to the cart station. But first they walked to the mouth of the canyon, in which Sanderson sat and watched the glory of the sunset. As the brilliant colors began to fade, they returned to the station, where the jubilant carters were finishing their loading chore. "Yes, we're all set to roll for Echo in the morning," Mary told them. "I'm going to my room for a while. Please don't go wandering off somewhere. I'll meet you in the branding pen." She paused for a few words with Saxon, then trotted to her room in the Reagan house. Slate and the sheriff entered the branding pen and made themselves comfortable at their reserved table, Crane fortifying himself with a snort of red-eye. Slade indulged in a cup of coffee. The carters thundered in, demanding service and in a very jovial mood, which did not make for peace and quiet. Mary's arrival didn't help much, for their greeting shivered the ceiling. Now it was well past full dark and the cook stuck his head out inquiringly. Slade nodded and the kitchen force at once got busy. "Walt, you were inspired." Mary Sackelt. "How did you know I'm hungry? Was there ever a time you weren't?" put in the sheriff. Mary appeared to consider the question very thoughtfully, and didn't commit herself. However, she did full justice to the cook's offerings, which was the highest compliment that could be paid them. "And after you gentlemen have finished your smokes I want to dance," she said. "The floor will not be so rowdy tonight, with the boys saving up for tomorrow night and their beloved Die Hard. To that they are really looking forward. Well, they earned it. I never knew them to work better than they did today." Saxon entered, his hands full of tally sheets he had been giving a last once-over. Mary joined him and for a while they worked together, verifying the results. Finally, everything in satisfactory condition. Saxon folded and stowed away his papers and he and Mary had a dance, with Slade next in line. So the hours walked along toward midnight, with the branding pen pleasant and peaceful. But the outlaws were not idle. 19. The Red Band Saloon occupied a building not far from the railroad yards, and was doing an excellent business. Wiley Chichi, the owner, was a newcomer to the section. Having bought the place from a former owner, he didn't take much stock in the stories of murders and robberies with which old-timers regaled him. Having been around quite a bit, he was not young. He knew such yards magnified in direct ratio to the number of times they were told. The barroom was crowded with a boisterous throng. In the back room, the door to the barroom shut to keep out the noise. Chichi sat at his table desk tallying several days' take, no small sum. He hummed tunefully under his breath as he listened complacently to the hullabaloo in the big bar room, which meant more money to tabulate. He dropped his gaze to the broad table that was covered with money. Chichi sat with his back to another door, on the far side of the room which opened on a dark alley. A slight clicking sound caused him to turn his head in that direction. He saw the door swing open, saw four men, hat brims pulled low, neckerchiefs up high, rush in and head for the table. Chichi made a grab for the old Smith & Wesson revolver lying in the open drawer. Then he fell to the floor, retching and gasping, as a blow from a gun barrel stretched him prone, blood from his split scalp visoring his face with scarlet. As he went down, he managed to squeeze the old smith's trigger. It boomed like thunder and the bullet thudded into the barroom door. The man who struck him bounded across the room and turned a key in the lock of the barroom door. His companions were scooping the money into a sack. By the time they had finished the chore, the barroom beyond the locked door was pandemonium, with somebody hammering the door. "All right, speed up," the gun wielder said calmly, "but don't leave any behind. Okay, let's go." The four robbers dashed out the back door, and as somebody in the barroom used a table as a battering ram and smashed open the locked door, horses' irons clicked away into the distance. The Red Band workers and patrons streaming into the back room found Waichichi sitting up holding his bloody head in his hands and cursing wholeheartedly. Fortunately, the robber's gun barrel had struck him a glancing blow and he was not badly hurt. "Fetch Sheriff Crane," he ordered. "I think you'll find him at the Branding Pen Saloon at this time of night. Don't know as there is anything he can do, but he must hear about it. Who's to blame? Nobody but myself. I should have listened to what folks told me, but no, I was too cocksure. I could take care of myself. Now, too late. I know better. Might be a good idea for you jiggers to keep in mind what happened. Might save you a nicked skull. By the way, somebody try and locate Doc Cooper. Chances are he's in his office, which is hardly more than around the corner. And while we are waiting for him, Gabe, wring out a clean towel and lay it over the cut." The head bartender hastened to do as he was told. A couple of floormen hurried out to find the doctor. Slate and the sheriff were in the branding pen, talking about the notion of calling it a night soon, when an excited floorman from the Red Band rushed in with his story of what happened. "All right, we'll go over there," Crane said, "and I don't think you need worry about us getting mixed up in something," Slade told Mary. "Be seeing you in a little while." When they reached the Red Band, they found plenty of excitement and plenty of business, otherwise everything under control. Chi-Chi was sitting in a chair drinking coffee, which Slade knew was good for him after losing some blood. Slade examined the vicinity of the wound with his sensitive fingers and decided there was nothing to worry about, which was verified by the doctor when he arrived a little later. A pad and a couple of strips of tape, and the patient was told to go out and get drunk. He was plied with a few questions which he answered as best he could. Slade advised him to change the locks and put bars across the doors, which he promised to do without delay. "Same old story," Slade said to Crane as they walked back to the branding pen. "Back door unlocked, no window blind, Chi-Chi sitting at a table covered with money, invitation to trouble. Lucky he wasn't killed. But he strikes me as a sensible individual and may have learned his lesson. He lost a lot of money, but I don't think that bothers him much. Was too glad that nobody was killed or seriously hurt. Well, learn more about him." In due time they reached the branding pen without further excitement of any kind. Mary was thankful they were back so soon. A few minutes later she gave Saxon a nod, which finished a rather eventful night. Everybody at Fine Fiddle, the carts, heavily loaded, rolled out of Sanderson, echo-bound. With them rode Slade, Estevan and the sheriff. For a while the conversation centered on the Red Band robbery and its details, so far as they knew them. "And you figure it was Bard and his bunch?" the sheriff asked of Slade. "I presume so," the ranger replied. "All the marks of one of his capers. Perhaps we'll know for sure soon enough." "They made a good haul," Crane remarked. "Maybe it will cause him to quiet down for a spell." "We'll just whet his appetite for more," Slade deferred. "And what they tied onto, though quite a sum, won't last the devils long. To their sort, money is just something to be spent. The faster the better." Crane nodded his understanding. The first stand of brakes came into view. Slade and Estevan scouted ahead, per usual, watchful and alert as always. Although El Halcon did not really expect trouble, because of an overcast sky, the trail was gloomy, but the ride was peaceful and not unpleasant. At the far edge they drew rein and waited for the carts to catch up. The carters were in a festive mood, and so's Mary. "Going to be a real nice trip," she declared. "I can just feel it. How about you, Walt?" "Wait till we see the echo derricks against the sky and you'd tell you," Slade replied. "You're a spoil sport," Mary accused. "Now about you, Uncle Tom." "I'm scared you have to say he's most always right," Crane admitted. "Two of a kind," said Mary. "Let's go, or it'll be too dark to see the derricks." The train rolled on, the carters whooping it up. The The second stand of breaks was a similar performance. "See," said Mary. "2 more to go," returned Slade, entering the third stand, the sheriff now keeping them company. Slade and Esteban were even more watchful than when traversing the other two, for if anything were to be attempted, it would take place in either the third or fourth stands, most likely the fourth. "Perhaps I'm just wishful thinking," he told Esteban, "but it seems to be a logical conclusion. What Capitan says is so is," said the knifeman. Slade slowed the pace a little. Now every movement of bird on the wing, every movement of little creature in the brush, were carefully studied, every alien sound checked and analyzed, for El Halcon was taking not at all any chances with Dane Bard and his unpredictable actions. To do so would be needlessly inviting trouble. With nothing untoward happening, they reached the east edge of the stand, and to their ears came a sound of shouts and singing, or what was apparently intended for singing. Riding straight toward them from the direction of the fourth stand came 6 horsemen, all bellowing their loudest, and waving their hands invitingly, apparently a group of cowhands on the loose. The sheriff chuckled. Esteban smiled. Slade did neither. As times before, it was Slade's remarkable eyes that saved them. He saw what they did not note, and correctly interpreted it. "Here comes trouble," he snapped. "Rein your horses against the brush as close as you can. Hunker down and shoot fast and shoot straight." "What in blazes?" the sheriff began. Hat brims pulled low, chin snugged down into neckerchiefs. Slade told him, "Get ready for business." 20 on came the drunken cowhands. They were but a few strides distant, hands stealthing to holsters, when Slade thundered, "That's far enough. Hands up. You are under arrest." The wild singing changed to startled yells. Horses were skated to a halt. Hands jerked guns. But a split second before they blazed, El Halcon drew and shot with both hands. An outlaw saddle was emptied. A second as the sheriff's gun boomed. Lead whizzed all around the little posse, but once again hunkering down paid off. The slugs went high. The hiss of Esteban's long blade took care of a third killer. The outlaw horses were going insane. A fourth owl hoot was in the dust. Again a double bellow of Slade's 45s left only one in the saddle. He managed to whirl his horse and send it crashing into the thick and tall growth, now darkening with the gloom after sunset. Slade tried to pursue, but it took even Shadow time to fight his way through the frantic horses blocking the trail. Slade gave up. In the darksome growth, the advantage would all be with the quarry, and they hadn't done too bad. 5 out of 6, and suffering no casualties. "But if you hadn't spotted those devils like you did, we would have suffered plenty of casualties," said the sheriff. "They would have blowed us from under our hats for we knew what it was all about." "It was a very clever try," Slade replied. "Pulled where they figured we would relax our vigilance. If they had let their hat brims alone, they might have gotten by with it. Always that brand makes the little slips that are often fatal to them. But Capitan the slip makes not," said Esteban as he wiped his reeking blade on a dead outlaw's hair. "Say it double," growled Crane. "Well, here come the carts, just in time to load up the carcasses. Horse coming first." It should be Mary. It was. A very perturbed Mary. "Nothing to tell you. Can't see the derricks against the sky yet." Slade greeted her, and received a scornful glance in reply. "Out of my sight and you're into it," she said. "All right, let's hear about it," the sheriff told her, stressing the part Slade played. She shook her shining curls. "Guess I'll have to forgive him," she said, and the look she bent on him was anything but scornful. Around the bend rumbled the carts, and the tale was repeated. "And now for echo," Mary said. "It's past full dark already, and everybody is starved." "Been so busy I forgot all about it," replied Crane. "Come to think about it, a couple of snorts would come in handy about now. Load up the carcasses and let's go." Without further adventure of any kind, they reached Echo and boomed through the railroad cut to the cart station, where the assembled well owners were anxiously waiting for them and wondering what had happened to them. They were told and raised a cheer, in which the carters joined on general principles. The cartload of bodies was detoured to the sheriff's office, where Deputy Arbois took charge of them. The carts were lined for unloading, the horses cared for, and the carters descended on the diehard. Slade and Mary repaired to their rooms in Westbrook Lemur's quarters to spruce up a bit before eating. The unloading would start early next morning. Soon, Slade joined the sheriff and the diehard. Mary, learner accompanying her, would arrive a bit later. "Figure the hellion who got away was Bard?" the sheriff asked. "Couldn't say for sure," Slade replied. but his reactions and timing were what we've come to associate with Bard. Anyhow, one thing is sure for certain, none of the 5 on your office floor is Bard. The sheriff grumbled and muttered an order to snort, which quickly made him feel better. Raidner came over from the far end of the bar to get accurate details of the day's happenings, the carter's account being a trifle sketchy, although wild and woolly enough. Before the talk was finished, Mary and Lemur arrived, the girl declaring she was starved. Has been quite a while since breakfast, Slade agreed. Raidner hurried to the kitchen. The cook waved his understanding and got busy. Crane ordered another snort to tide him over until the food was prepared. It was a very pleasant meal they enjoyed, but Slade was not as relaxed as he could have been, for still confronting him was the problem of Dane Bard and his possible activities. And there was no doubt that Bard was not only out to grab off all the easy money he could but also to wreak vengeance on the man who had thwarted him so many times. Well, the Sidewinder was handed another setback today, right on the heels of his successful raid on the Red Band Saloon, which would tend to nullify the boost that raid gave his prestige. As it was, so it would be. He tossed Mr. Bard out of his mind and threw himself wholeheartedly into the festivities. They were gay enough, all right. For the wild episode in the 4th breaks had keyed up everybody, and the reaction had not yet set in, which it would before long, and meant an early night, with the unloading started as soon as it was light enough to work. So Slade determined to relax as much as possible for the short period of restful time vouchsafed him. He had called his visit to the section a sequel to the previous one, but it was turning out to be more in the nature of a feud between him and Dane Bard. Well, it gave a zest to the prosaic business of running down robbers and rustlers. He smiled at the thought, but had to admit it was true. Dinner over, dancing was in order, and a period of sprightly conversation, in which Slade joined. Soon even the taciturn sheriff was chuckling at the quips Mary and Slade tossed back and forth, with Lemur and Saxon doing their share to keep things lively. The Carters were not remiss and did not shirk their obligations, which apparently were to raise as much heck as possible. But the reaction was finally setting in, and very soon everybody sought much-needed repose. In the early morning, the unloading started, with every hope of finishing the chore before dark, the well owners and their workers lending a helping hand. "Do we ride with the empties tomorrow?" the sheriff asked of Slade. "I rather think so," the ranger replied, "if something doesn't occur to cause me to alter my plans. I'm anxious to reach Sanderson because I expect to find an answer there to a message I sent my friend in the land office. An answer I hope will clarify things and tell us just how we stand relative to the Birdno oil wells that Dane Bard is trying to tie onto, and which may bring a showdown between Bard and myself." "I sure hope so," sighed the sheriff. "Chasing that hellion back and forth between Echo and Sanderson is getting tiresome. By the way, Sam Vibbett, who owns the new claim rum hole over to the east side of the field, was in the Die Hard earlier. Sent you regards. I'll try and visit his place later, as I promised him I would," Slade replied. "Meanwhile, how about taking a look at the unloading?" Crane suggested. Mary felt sure it would be done before dark and the carts ready to roll. "What say?" "Not a bad idea," Slade agreed. "Certainly nothing more we can do here. Arbois will take over the office. We won't be missed. Lock the door and let's go." The station was a place of outstanding and noisy activity, the carters whooping and singing as they worked, the well owners doing their part. No doubt that the unloading would be finished before dark, with time to spare. Slade and the sheriff were greeted with cheers. Mary came to join them for a little while. "Everything lovely," she enthused, "and I predict a nice, peaceful trip to Sanderson. No trouble. Are you and Uncle Tom going to ride with us?" "Walt, we plan to, unless something or somebody forces us to alter our plans," Slade answered, "which I somehow don't figure will take place. Yes, I think you can depend on bad company this trip." "Got to get back to work," Mary laughed. "Uncle Westbrook is giving a hand with the checklists. See you later, dear." She skipped back to her post. Slade and the sheriff continued their stroll, glancing through windows, pausing now and then to inspect something, or to listen for a few moments to what sounded like an altercation building up but wasn't. They walked through the railroad cut and viewed the beauty of the sunset from its south mouth, heading back to town as the vivid hues faded. Mary had been a bit optimistic in her estimate, and it was past full dark before the last cart was emptied. In line to roll, the carters, their work finished, boomed into the Die Hard. Mary, Lerner and Saxon had to stay on, by lantern light, to make the final checks with the well owners. Then Saxon repaired to the Die Hard to join Slade and a sheriff, Mary and Lerner hastening to the magnate's quarters to freshen up a bit. Saxon and the sheriff had drinks, Slade coffee to hold them until Mary appeared, which she did before so very long. Lerner with her. The cook got busy. They enjoyed a lengthy and quiet dinner, quiet so far as their immediate surroundings were concerned. The carters were kicking up their usual row at the bar, but were like the itch, which one gets used to after a while. So the hours passed, pleasantly enough, but Slade was getting restless, and a bit weary of the smoke and the noise. He glanced around. Mary and Saxon were dancing. Lerner was talking with Vince Rader. "Tom," he said, "what say we walk across the field and pay Sam Vibbleton his new claim bar a visit as I promised to?" "A prime notion," said the sheriff. "I'll sure be glad to get away from this racket for a while. Let's go." With a final glance around, they set out, slipping through the swinging doors without being noticed. They walked slowly across the field, enjoying the cool and bracing air. After a while they saw the lighted building that housed the new claim, and as they drew near, they noted that the building was pretty well surrounded by chaparral. "Listen to the yelling," snorted the sheriff. "They make as much racket as the Carters 21 in the new claim." There was action aplenty. The barroom was crowded with a noisy throng. The door to the back room stood half open. Through the opening, Sam Vibbleton could be seen sitting close to his office safe, smoking his pipe. The door of the safe was open, and there was money in that safe. For nearly an hour, three quiet, unobtrusive men had been standing near the end of the bar from where they could see into the back room. One carried a not very large bundle of something under his arm. He glanced at the others, who nodded. He slid quietly to the foot of the nearby stairs leading to the second floor, shifting the bundle to his hand. With a quick glance around, he snapped a match with his thumbnail, touched the tiny flame to the bundle. It flickered, smoldered. He deftly flipped it up the stairs to the floor of the second-story room. It sparked, burst into flame. A blinding cloud of yellowish smoke billowed up. The draft sucked it down the stairwell. The three began bawling fire at the top of their voices. They emptied the bar room in a matter of seconds, the crowd boiling out onto the street to escape those acrid fumes. The three dashed into the back room, one banging shut the barroom door and turning a key in the lock. In the back room, Sam Vibbleton leaped to his feet and headed for the barroom door, and halted, rocking back on his heels. He was looking into the muzzle of a gun. "All right," said the gun wielder, "clean the money out of the safe and put it in his sack. Move, and don't overlook any if you want to stay healthy. Move." Shaking all over, Vibbleton began doing as he was told. He was in no position to do otherwise, with that gun trained on his heart, and death in the glittering eyes of the man who held it. Slade and the sheriff were close to the new claim building when Crane suddenly uttered an exclamation. "For the love of Pete, look, there's smoke coming out that upstairs window. The blasted rum hole is on fire." Slade gave a single glance and leaped forward. "Come on," he snapped. "There's hell going on in there. I'll hit the back door with my shoulder, against the chance it may be locked. Then in we go. Be ready to shoot. Let's go." The door wasn't locked. It crashed open to reveal just such a tableau as Slade expected to see. Sam Vibbleton was taking money from his safe, dropping it into a sack held by a hard-faced individual. Two similar characters lounged against a wall nearby. All three whirled toward the open door. The man holding the sack dropped it and went for his holster, as did the other two. "Up!" Slade shouted. "You are under arrest." He drew and shot with both Colts as he spoke. A battle royal shook the building. Weaving, ducking, slithering, El Halcon answered the Alhoots shot for shot. One fell as the big .45s boomed. Then another, as a slug turned Slade's hat sideways. The sheriff's six-shooter cracked, and there were three on the floor. "Guess that takes care of that," Slade said as he unlocked the barroom door and flung it open, letting in some wisps of smoke as the oil and sulfur bundle of cotton waste still smoldered. "Go up and stamp it out," Slade ordered the foremen who were the first of the general exodus to return. "Mr. Slade," gasped Vibbleton, who was still shaking, "always right where you're needed most." And the sheriff, "Suppose the door was open and anybody could see the safe door was open, too, providing a perfect opportunity for the robbers, and they took advantage of it," Slade remarked. "A very nice try, but not quite good enough." "Would have been good enough were it not for you," Vibbleton declared with conviction. "Recall a somewhat similar attempt," Slade resumed. "That time a fire-tipped arrow was shot onto the dry roof of a building. Naturally, As this time, when smoke and sparks came pouring down into the bar room, everybody got out in a hurry. I'd advise, Mr. Vibbit, that you keep your doors locked and barred, and your safe door shut. Well, guess there's nothing more we can do here. We'll send a cart and a crew to move the bodies to the sheriff's office, and I think there are 3 good horses tethered in the brush somewhere nearby. Have them rooted out and cared for. Okay, be seeing you. Slate and the sheriff departed, followed by added thanks from Vibbit, and commending shouts from the crowd that now packed the new claim. Well, a nice finish to a nice day, the sheriff chuckled as they headed for the diehard. Not yet midnight. Guess we'll get a scolding for gallivanting off without telling Mary, but we're sorta getting used to that. However, Mary was not in much of a scolding mood and was glad. Nothing bad happened to Sam Vibbit, of whom she thought well, and the carters welcomed a chance to go roaring over to the new claim to pick up the bodies. And now we really will have a cartload to pack to Sanderson tomorrow. Saxon chuckled. If Walt will just promise to stick around, I'll get myself appointed undertaker and get rich. Before calling it a night, Slate and the sheriff gave the 3 bodies a once-over. All had undoubtedly worked around oil fields a while back, nothing else of significance. Not much money, which last meant that Dane Bart would be active without undue delay. About mid-morning the long train of empties rolled, and though he didn't mention it to the others, Slate experienced a feeling that this might well be his last trip as a cart convoy to Sanderson. From Sanderson to Echo, didn't appear to be anything said in it that, by the premonition, which he thought interesting. With him rode Estevan and the sheriff, both in a jovial mood. So were the carters, per usual. Another beautiful day, said Mary. "Auntie, I'm expecting a nice, pleasant trip with no trouble." "Hope you're right," said Crane. "We could stand a little peace and quiet for a while." Slade felt the same way but was not so optimistic. Things hadn't been working out that way of late. The first stand of breaks came into view looking almost benign in the bright sunshine. Nevertheless, Slade did not relax his vigilance, and he and Estevan were very much on the alert as they rode through the band of growth. However, nothing untoward happened. At the far end of the growth, they drew rein and waited for the carts to catch up. When the head of the train cleared the brakes, they conversed with Mary and Saxon for a little while, then scouted ahead and through the second stand of brakes, again without interference. "See," Mary said, "everything lovely and going to stay that way." Number 3 and number 4 still to clear, Slade reminded. "Here's hoping." But this time Mary did prove to be a prophet with honor. They did clear the 3rd and 4th stands, and with the sun still well up in the sky, the carts rumbled through the Sanderson streets into the station. The outlaw bodies were deposited in the sheriff's office, the carts lined for loading. Slade at once repaired to the post office, where the answer to his message to the land office was being held for him. With the sheriff waiting expectantly, he perused the letter, his black brows drawing together until the concentration furrow was deep between them, which the sheriff knew to be a sure sign that El Halcon was doing some hard thinking. Finally, without immediate comment, he passed the letter from his land office friend to Crane, who read, in part: Kenneth Birdnell, a brother, was Jason Birdnell's sole heir. Titles to Echo Oil Wells will without doubt revert estate, the Birdnells leaving no wills. The sheriff stared at the message for some moments. Then, what effect will this have on Dane Bard, he wondered. Slade shook his head. I don't know, he admitted. He'll be in a towering rage when he learns of it, as he will, and sees his carefully planned schemes to tie onto the wells are for naught. One thing I think for certain, he'll be out to even the score in some way, which means trouble for us, no doubt as to that. Here in Sanderson, the sheriff asked. Again, I don't know, Slade replied, but I do feel that the final showdown will take place in Echo. The sooner, the better, Crane said, adding blithely, anyhow, it's been a nice lively feutin', with the personal touch. Just a mite too lively at times. Slade smiled. The sheriff indulged in a sympathetic chuckle. Well, it's beginning to get dark, he said. Guess we better amble over to the branding pen. Time for a few snorts and something to eat. A notion, Slade agreed. They locked up and set out. Deputy Arball would take over the office and let folks take a look at the bodies, if they were so minded. So you finally made it, Mary greeted them. The boys got quite a bit of loading done and have knocked off for the night. And we are all starving to death. Sit down here close to me, Walt, and don't try to get away. Slade did as he was told. Hard Rock Hogan hurried to the kitchen. An inspired waiter set a drink before the sheriff. Slade showed Mary the letter from the land office. She read it slowly and carefully, a pucker between her pretty black brows. "It's good to know the office is back of you," she said as she returned it to him. "Now anything you do is taken care of, and you believe Bard may make a try at evening the score." "That's my opinion," Slade replied. "If he does, it will be something novel, outstanding and unexpected, on which we can depend. So it's up to me to try and outguess him, anticipate what he has in mind and thwart it, if possible. And I fear you have set yourself quite a on Mary's side." "Don't worry, he'll make it," said the sheriff, "no doubt in my mind as to that." Waiter, the Carters tomatoed in, well pleased with the loading they had accomplished and with things in general. Business picked up. Saxon joined Slade and Mary and the sheriff and they ate their leisurely dinner together, to the accompaniment of sprightly conversation. Slade banished Dane Bard from his mind for the time being. It was a typical branding pen evening, with music and laughter and hilarity. The problems of the morrow were dismissed and everybody concentrated on having a good time, which pleased Slade. He rather doubted that Bard would pull something during the evening and night. If he did, he, Slade, would try and take care of it. Nobody could do any more. He shrugged his broad shoulders and ordered more coffee. The hours passed, but after a long and hard day, even the Carters favored calling it an early night. 22 and no word, good or bad, from Dane Bard. The following morning, Slade and the sheriff visited the cart station and found the loading going forward at pace. The Carters, busy as bees, are credited with being. "Yes, we'll roll tomorrow," Echo bound, Mary told them. They chatted with her for a while and then continued their stroll, which covered most of the town, and no signs of Dane Bard or his bunch. "Maybe the hellion, learning his scheme to grab the oil wells is no good, has decided to move out of the section while the going is good," the sheriff suggested. Slade shook his head. "I don't think so," he deferred. "My strong hunch tells me we'll meet up with him either between here and Echo or in Echo, and that the meeting will be a showdown. As I've said before, here's hoping," sighed Crane. "Maybe Estevan will have something to tell us tonight." "He's convinced that Bard is not in Sanderson," Slade replied. "Insists that if he were, his amigos would have spotted the devil. He feels sure that Bard is in Echo, awaiting our arrival." He could be right. They resumed walking, gradually working their way south to the mouth of the canyon, from which they watched the never-ending marvel of the sunset. When the sky began to darken, they sauntered to the station, where the loading was completed, Mary and Saxon making their final check. "I'm going to rest up a little and then I'll meet you at the branding pen," she told Slade, and headed fast for her room in the Reagan house. Slade and the sheriff continued on their way and entered the branding pen, where the Carters were making merry. Slade and Crane joined in, the one with coffee, the other with snorts of red dye. Mary and Saxon soon arrived and there was a lively discussion before they ordered their dinner. It seemed to Slade that the place was shrouded with an air of expectancy, of portentous events in the making. He blamed his overactive imagination but did not altogether ignore it, and he kept a closer than usual watch on his surroundings. However, dinner passed peacefully enough, with no alarms, and everybody enjoyed a sumptuous meal. Slade topped off with more coffee, the sheriff knocked off an extra snort, Mary sipped a small glass of wine. Suddenly the kitchen lights seemed to dim. Slade was sure they did. A moment in, from the dark alley back of the saloon came a scream, a frightful blood-gurgling scream fraught with agony and terror, that brought everybody to their feet, chattering, exclaiming. Slade knew it came from close to the black square of the open window in the far wall, the window through which Kenneth Burnell, Jason Birdnell's heir, was shot to death. "Hold it! Stay right where you are!" Slade snapped to the sheriff as the kitchen lights brightened. Light showed in the alley. Somebody had opened the kitchen back door. Then the glow of a lamp. "Hey!" yelled a Carter who had leaned out the window. "Hey, there's a dead man laying under this window. He has a gun in his hand, but he didn't get a chance to use it," Slade remarked dryly to the sheriff. "And you knew what happened?" Crane sputtered. "I'm quite familiar with the road that usually follows Estevan's knife stroke," Slade replied. "His blade work prevented another murder. He'll be in to tell us about it shortly. Guess you'd better take charge, Tom, and have the boys haul the body in and pack it to the office." The sheriff gave the orders. The Carters hastened to his bidding, meanwhile insisting the dead man was an ordinary-looking specimen. Slade was inclined to agree with them. A more careful examination would come later. While the chore was being taken care of, Estevan sauntered in, bowed to El Halk SN, smiled to Mary and the sheriff. "Nice work, amigo," Slade complimented him. "How did you handle it?" The ladrone heard outside, Esteban explained. "The lights were dimmed, the kitchen door back screened. As it can be, out I slipped. The ladrone was rising up the window under, a gun his hand in. My blade drank deep. The light was bad, my stroke offside the little. Otherwise there would have been no sound." He smiled and nodded, bowed again to El Halcon and sauntered out. "He is wonderful, but he is terrible. But I love him for saving Walt." "Which I imagine is just what he did," Mary said. "Very likely," Slade conceded. "I'd likely have seen the gun shoved in the window, but there would have been people between me and the window and I might very well have missed. Well, how about a little more wine? I'm going in for a swig of coffee, and perhaps we can induce Uncle Tom to have a snort, after which we'll visit the office for a few minutes and give the body a once-over." "Right on all counts," said the sheriff, "and please get back in a hurry," Mary begged. Slade quickly determined that the dead man had once been a cowhand and had worked some around oil fields. His pockets divulged a rather large sum of money. "Again the price of murder," Slade commented. "Which again a hellion never got a chance to spend," said Crane. "Doc Cooper can hold another inquest if he is sorta minded. Thought the cartload would hold him, but they seem to keep right on coming." "Okay, Arbois, clear the office and lock up shop until tomorrow. Let's go, Walt." At the brandling pen they found Mary, Saxon and the carters also ready to lock up shop for the night. Around the following mid-morning the carts rolled for Echo, with Slade, Esteban and the sheriff more than usually alert, for all three were convinced that the final showdown between El Halcon and Dane Bard was very, very close. So even the first stand of breaks out of Sanderson was given careful attention. The second stand received a similar treatment, only the sky was becoming overcast, which slowed the advance. And when they sighted the third stand, the belt of growth looked gloomy and ominous. However, nothing happened in the course of threading the trail between the encroaching bristles. Outside the thinning straggle they drew rein and waited for the carts to catch up, which they soon did, and halted. "Well," Slade said, "it's either in that tangle ahead or it's in Echo, and my guess now is Echo. Let's go, Tommy, let's go, Esteban." They scouted ahead again, every sense of hair-trigger alertness, studying everything that might possibly harbor something of significance and seeing nothing. "Well, guess that settles the brakes," Slade said as the train of carts, heavily laden, came into view. RFND rumbled to a halt beside where they sat their horses. "Yes, Echo it is, and heaven grant there'll be no more after Echo," Mary sighed. "I'll have to admit that this continual suspense is beginning to get on my nerves." "All right, Walt, let's go." The train rolled on toward the dark smudge that stained the eastern sky. The weather had cleared and the carts drew rein at the station inn. Bright sunshine, the assembled well owners raising a cheer, which the carters echoed. A cup of coffee and a sandwich and the unloading began at once. To make the most of the precious sunlight, Mary scampered to a room in Lemur's quarters to change, and comb her hair and powder her nose, as she expressed it. Slate and the sheriff sat in the die-hard and discussed coffee and snorts. Lerner arrived to lend a hand with the unloading, working with Saxon until Mary showed up. Everybody busy and happy. Only, Slade was anxiously awaiting Esteban with something he might possibly have learned that would result in contact with Dane Bard. Shaking his head, Slade gazed at the darkening window panes. The exerters were streaming in, their work for the day finished, and still no Esteban. Esteban did finally arrive, and his eyes were snapping. He came straight to Slade's table. "Capitan," he said, lowering his voice, "to the Bird Noel's walk." Latrone and two others, all the whiskers were. They walk not too fast, and not too slow. "When a bundle carries what the blazes," began the sheriff. "I don't know what it is," Slade said, surging to his feet, "but it means some deviltry, on that you can't depend. Come on, outside." He set the reckless pace, dodging derricks, shacks that housed machinery, clumps of brush. A strong wind was blowing, kicking up dust around a final shack. He led his little posse, grouped around one of the Bird Noels, which had been uncapped. Oil trickling from an overflow pipe to form a widening pool, were three bearded men, one just passing a bundle of something to another. And El Halcon understood. Startled exclamations as the posse surged in view. Slade's voice rolled in thunder. "Up, you are under arrest. I know you, Bard. Get your hands up or I'll kill you." Dane Bard shrieked his rage as his hand flashed down and up, His draw was as the flicker of a falcon's wing, almost too fast for the eye to follow, but before he could line sights, he reeled back, and fell, his breast shattered by the ranger's bullets, and thus was ended the feud between El Chaucan and Danebard, a feud that would become a saga of the Southwest. Slade moved slowly forward. Estevan and the sheriff had already taken care of Bard's last remaining henchman. With scarcely a glance at the still forms, Slade picked up the bundle that had fallen from a dead hand, and carefully tucked it under his arm. Now people were running toward the well from every direction, cursing, bawling questions. Among the first to arrive were Mary and Lehrer. "Got him, eh?" said the magnate, just in time to frustrate his plan for revenge before he pulled out of the section. His plan was to blow the uncapped well and start a fire that would destroy the other Birdnell wells, and with this strong wind blowing and oil flowing in over everything, it would very likely have destroyed the whole field. "Dynamite in that bundle." "You're right," Slade replied. "My heart was in my throat while Tom was drilling the devil who packed it. If one of his slugs had struck the bundle, well, it would have been nice to know you all." The sheriff swore under his mustache. Mary shuddered. Slade stripped the false beards from the dead outlaws. There was a chorus of exclamations as Bard's features were recognized, and more questions that Slade and the sheriff answered briefly. "Drop in at my office later and take a good look, and we'll talk," Crane concluded. "Boys, the big mistake Danebard made was trying to trade shots with the fastest gun hand in the whole Southwest." The carters had arrived in force and packed the bodies to the sheriff's office, where Deputy Arball laid them out on the floor. "And now," said Slade, "let's make a try for a decidedly belated dinner. Come on, Mary." Naturally, while they ate they discussed Danebard. "A strange man," Slade said. "No normal person could understand for sure the workings of that warped mind. At least, he held courage. Put that down in his favor. Suppose you'll be moving now," Lerner remarked. Slade smiled and shook his head. "Not just yet," he replied. "I figure to stick around and take it easy for a week or two. I'd like to take a few rides with the carts just as a bystander with nothing to bother my head about." Mary cast him a grateful look and smiled, too, although tears gemmed her dark lashes, and it was Mary who, more than a week later, said the last goodbye, "Hasta luego," rather, "until we meet again," as she watched him ride away, tall and graceful atop his great black horse, the evening sunlight etching his sternly handsome profile in flame. To where the new adventure beckoned. OceanofPDF.com